Have you ever had a reaction that felt too big for the moment, where a sudden noise made your heart pound, or a certain tone of voice made you shut down completely, and you later wondered, where did that come from? It's as if your body has a memory all its own, a memory that sometimes speaks louder than your logical mind. This is what we're going to gently explore together. Many of us walk through life carrying a hidden weight. We might call it stress, or anxiety, or just a feeling of being constantly on edge. But sometimes it's more than that. It's the body's brilliant, ancient survival system working in overdrive, stuck in a pattern that was once meant to protect us, but now just makes us feel stuck, disconnected from others, and even disconnected from ourselves. It's not that you're broken. It is that a part of you is still trying to keep you safe from a storm that has long since passed. In the conversations we'll have in this series, we're not going to just relive painful stories. Instead, we're going to build a new understanding. We'll learn the language of the body's alarm system, not to fight it, but to thank it for its service and help it finally stand down. We'll talk about pathways that can lead you back to a sense of safety inside your own skin, back to feeling more present in your life and your relationships. If you're ready to understand that hidden weight, not as a life sentence, but as a map pointing toward healing, then take a deep breath. You're in the right place. Let's begin. You know, sometimes the most important journeys begin with a question we've been asking all wrong. For the longest time, when someone was struggling after a painful experience, we would look at them and ask, "What's wrong with you?" But the real question, the one that changed everything, was this: what happened to you? It sounds simple, but that shift changed the entire conversation. It took us from a place of judgment to a place of curiosity, and it led to a rediscovery of what trauma really is. Let me tell you about a veteran I'll call James. James came home from war and looked on the surface like he was doing everything right. He had a job, a family, a house, but inside he was at war. A car backfiring would send him diving to the pavement. The smell of certain foods would trigger a nausea so profound he'd have to leave the room. He loved his wife, but he couldn't bear her touch. He adored his children, but their playful screams felt like a threat. When he sought help, he was told he had anxiety. He was told he was depressed. He was given medications to quiet the symptoms. But no one ever asked what happened to his nervous system. No one understood that his body had learned a lesson in survival that it could not unlearn. You see, we all have an incredible internal alarm system. It's designed to keep us safe. When we're in danger, it takes over. Our heart pounds, our muscles tense, our vision narrows. We are ready to fight, to flee, to do whatever it takes to survive. This is a biological miracle, but what happens when the danger is so overwhelming that you can fight and you can flee? What happens when you are utterly trapped? That survival energy, that massive surge of life force, has nowhere to go. It doesn't just disappear, it gets stuck. It stays in the body. And the alarm system, having done its job so well, decides it can never truly turn off again. It becomes a constant, humming background noise in your life. This is what was happening to James. His body was keeping the score. It was holding the memory of terror in his muscles, in his heartbeat, in his gut. His anger wasn't a character flaw, it was trapped fight energy. His numbness wasn't a lack of love. It was a freeze response that had become a permanent state. His mind wanted to move on, but his body was steadfastly loyal to the past, convinced it was still under threat. And this creates a loneliness that is so hard to put into words. How do you explain to your loved ones that you feel like a stranger in your own life? That you're sitting at the dinner table with them, but you're a million miles away, locked in a secret world of fear? So you put on a mask. You learn to pretend, you force a smile and nod along, while inside you are exhausted from the constant vigilance. Or you simply withdraw, because it's easier to be alone than to feel so completely misunderstood. The great rediscovery was that trauma is not just the story of what happened to you 10 or 20 years ago. It is the lingering imprint of that experience, etched into your biology. It's a physiological state. And when we understand that, everything changes. We stop seeing people as broken and start seeing them as stuck. We see their symptoms not as the problem, but as the body's best and most courageous attempt to solve the problem of overwhelming threat. The challenge is not to eliminate these survival responses, but to help the body complete the process that was interrupted, to help it understand on a deep visceral level that the danger has passed, that it is safe to stand down. Healing begins when we stop fighting the parts of us that are trying to protect us and instead learn to listen to them. It begins when we befriend our own bodies and help them to finally, truly come home. Thank you for joining me today. We are going to step into a chapter of history that holds some of the most profound lessons we've ever learned about human suffering and resilience. This is the story of how a generation of veterans taught us to see trauma with new eyes. It was the late 1970s. The war in Vietnam was over, but for many of the men and women who returned, the battle was far from finished. They came back to a country that often didn't understand them, and to a medical system that had no name for what they were going through. I want to tell you about Tom. Tom was a former Marine, a platoon leader, and by the time he walked into a clinic, he was also a successful lawyer. On paper, he had perfectly reassembled his life. But inside, he was living in a nightmare. The sound of fireworks on the 4th of July didn't signal celebration. It sent him right back into the jungle, hearing the crack of gunfire, seeing the faces of his friends. He would wake up in a cold sweat, reliving an ambush in a rice paddy where he lost everyone in his platoon. He told his doctor about the nightmares, the rage that would bubble up out of nowhere, the feeling of being completely numb to his wife and children. He was prescribed medication for the bad dreams, but when he returned, he confessed he hadn't taken it, and his reason has stayed with me ever since. He said, "If I take the pills and the nightmares go away, I will have abandoned my friends. Their deaths will have been in vain. I need to be a living memorial to my friends who died in Vietnam." That statement was a key that unlocked a door. This wasn't just a chemical imbalance or a simple case of bad memories. This was something much deeper, more complex, and profoundly human. His loyalty to the dead was keeping him from living. His trauma had become the sole source of meaning in his life, the only place where he felt connected to the men he had loved and lost. His past had completely hijacked his present, and Tom was not alone. The clinics were filling with men who were outwardly angry and volatile, but inwardly drowning in shame and a sense of being utterly, irrevocably broken. They felt like monsters in their own homes. They would fly into rages over minor frustrations, their fists going through drywall. They were terrified of their own emotions, and their families were terrified of them. At the time, psychiatry had all sorts of labels for them: depression, anxiety, substance abuse, even schizophrenia. We tried every drug in the cabinet. We encouraged them to talk about the details of their trauma, which often just triggered devastating flashbacks and made things worse. We were not only failing to help, we were sometimes actively making things more painful. We were missing the central point. The first great lesson the veterans taught us was that trauma is not just about the event that happened back then. It's about how that event continues to live on inside the body and the mind right now. It's a fundamental rearrangement of a person's entire nervous system. One of the most painful aspects for these men was the emotional numbness. Tom desperately wanted to love his family, to feel the joy of watching his sons grow up. But he said it was like living behind a glass wall. He could see them, but he couldn't feel anything for them. The only thing that made him feel truly alive was the high-stakes intensity of a difficult court case. It was like being in combat, a total focus where nothing else mattered. But the moment the case was over, the void would return, larger and more terrifying than before. This makes perfect sense when we understand the biology of survival. When you are in a life or death situation, your brain shuts down non-essential functions. You don't need to feel tender emotions or long-term aspirations when you were trying to dodge bullets. You need focus, adrenaline, and rage. For these soldiers, that state of hyper-alertness became their permanent reality. Their bodies were stuck in the past, constantly defending against a threat that was no longer there. The part of the brain that allows for feeling safe, for connection, for pleasure, had gone offline. The second lesson was about memory itself. For most of us, memories are stories. We can look back on a painful event and say, that was a terrible day last year. But for someone with trauma, the memory isn't a story from the past. It is a physical experience happening in the present. I remember working with a former medic named Bill. A decade after he returned home, his wife had a baby. The first day he was left alone with his newborn, the baby started to cry. And that sound instantly transported Bill. He wasn't in his safe suburban home. He was back in Vietnam, holding dying children, hearing their screams, smelling the blood. He was having a full-body, full-sensory flashback. We did a simple test with him, showing him ambiguous ink blots. Where you or I might see a butterfly or two dancers, Bill saw the charred flesh of a child, wounds and spurting blood. His mind was superimposing the trauma onto everything. He had lost the mental flexibility to imagine, to play, to see anything other than the horror. His past had become the only lens through which he could see the world. This is a failure of imagination, and imagination is not a luxury. It is the launchpad for hope, for creativity, for envisioning a future different from your past. When that is gone, people become stuck in an endless loop, reliving the same terrible reel. The final, and perhaps most transformative lesson from the veterans was the power of shared understanding. When I started a group for them, the first man to speak declared, "I do not want to talk about the war." But after a long silence, another veteran began to speak about his helicopter crash, and the room came alive. They had found their tribe. They had found people who spoke their language, who didn't flinch at the stories, who understood the unspoken shame. They had felt so isolated in their civilian lives, but in that room, they were reunited with the sense of comradeship that had been so vital to their survival. They gave me a Marine captain's uniform for my birthday, not as a gift, but as an initiation. You were either in or you were out. And after trauma, the world becomes sharply divided between those who know and those who don't. This need for belonging is why the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, which was formally recognized in 1980 after extensive lobbying by veterans and their allies, was so revolutionary. Giving a name to their suffering validated it. It said, "This is a real condition. You are not crazy. You are not a monster. You are having an understandable reaction to an overwhelming experience." It moved the problem from a personal failing to a recognized wound. The journey of these veterans taught us that healing from trauma cannot happen in isolation. It requires safety and it requires connection. It requires us to help the nervous system learn that the danger is over, and to help the mind rediscover its capacity for imagination and play. It's about helping people to not just be survivors, but to become fully alive participants in their own lives once again. Their struggle, their pain, and their courage forced the entire field of mental health to reconsider everything we thought we knew. And for that, we owe them a debt of gratitude that can never fully be repaid. They were our first and perhaps most important teachers. So we've seen how the stories of veterans began to change the conversation, but to truly understand what they were teaching us, we needed to look deeper. We needed a revolution in our understanding of the mind itself. And that revolution began in a place you might not expect, the back wards of psychiatric hospitals. Let me take you back to the late 1960s. I was working on a research ward at a leading psychiatric hospital. Our unit was filled with bright college students from places like Harvard and MIT who had suffered what was called a first mental break. They were terrified, withdrawn, sometimes hearing voices or lost in their own realities, and we were trying to answer a seemingly simple question. What works better? Intensive talking therapy or the new medications that were just coming onto the scene? But during the long night shifts, something else happened. In the quiet of the nursing station, these young patients would open up. They wouldn't talk about their diagnosed hallucinations or delusions. They would tell me, in hushed tones, about the real horrors they had lived through. They spoke about lying in bed at night as children, hearing their mothers being beaten. They talked about the footsteps of a drunk father coming down the hall, waiting for the inevitable punishment. They shared memories of being molested by relatives, frozen in fear. And then, the next morning, during formal rounds with the senior doctors, these stories were never mentioned. The focus was entirely on managing their symptoms, the self-harm, the suicidal thoughts, the so-called bizarre behaviors. We were trying to fix the smoke alarm while ignoring the fire. We were so focused on what was wrong with their brains that we never asked what had happened to them in their lives. This was the first revolution, a shift from asking, "What's wrong with you?" to "What happened to you?" It seems so obvious now, but back then, it was a radical idea. We started to realize that many of the symptoms we were seeing, the panic, the dissociation, the rage, weren't random malfunctions. They were adaptations. They were survival strategies that had become stuck on a continuous loop. Around this same time, a second revolution was gathering steam, the pharmacological revolution. The discovery of medications that could calm agitation or lift the cloud of depression was a genuine miracle. I saw it with my own eyes. I was part of the first team in Boston to administer lithium to a woman who had been cycling between mania and depression for 35 years. For the first time in decades, she found stability. I witnessed patients who had been locked away in state hospitals, lost in terrifying worlds, suddenly re-emerge. They could leave the institutions and reconnect with their families. It was breathtaking. There was a powerful hope that we could finally conquer human suffering through chemistry. The idea was seductive. Mental illness as a chemical imbalance, a simple equation that needed the right drug to balance it out. And this new model needed a new language, a way to standardize and communicate. So, we developed a system of diagnosis, a checklist of symptoms. This was meant to be a tool for researchers, a common language to ensure we were all studying the same thing. But something got lost in translation. This system, this checklist, began to take on a life of its own. It started to feel less like a map and more like a cage. We began to define people by their diagnoses, the schizophrenic in room 204, the borderline in the day room. The rich, complex, painful story of a human life was being reduced to a disorder code in a manual. We were categorizing the wounds without truly understanding the weapon that had caused them. And then, I encountered a piece of research that would change the course of my own thinking. It was an experiment with dogs, and I have to warn you, it's difficult to hear. These dogs were placed in cages and subjected to painful, inescapable electric shocks. At first, they tried to escape. But when they learned that nothing they did could stop the pain, they gave up. Later, when the door to the cage was left wide open and the shocks started again, they didn't even try to run. They just lay there, whimpering. They had learned helplessness, and in that moment, I saw my patients. I saw the veterans, the abused children, the survivors of assault. They, too, had been in inescapable situations. Their fight-or-flight response had been thwarted, and they had learned on a deep, visceral level that action was futile, that there was no escape. This wasn't a philosophical belief. It was a biological lesson etched into their nervous systems. This was the bridge between the psychological and the physiological. Trauma wasn't just a story about the past. It was a physical state of learned helplessness in the present. The body had learned to shut down because fighting back or running away had not been an option. This explained the collapse, the numbness, the depression we so often saw. It wasn't a lack of will. It was a body defending itself the only way it knew how. The final piece of this revolution came from looking at the brain's own chemistry. We began to understand the role of neurotransmitters, like serotonin. Think of serotonin as the brain's brake pedal. It helps dampen the alarm signals, allowing us to assess a situation calmly rather than react in panic. In animals with low serotonin, we saw hyperreactivity. They were easily startled, quick to aggression. In dominant animals, serotonin levels were high, but if you knocked that animal down the social hierarchy, its serotonin would drop. The social environment was directly shaping brain chemistry. This was a stunning insight. It meant that our interactions, our sense of safety and status, could literally change our brain's operating system. When the brain's brake pedal isn't working well, people become trapped in cycles of reaction. They can't easily calm down. They feel flooded by sensations and emotions. And then a new class of drugs arrived that promised to boost this very system. I remember the first patient I prescribed it to. She was a woman with a history of childhood abuse who was struggling with bulimia. She spent her life in a torturous cycle of binging and purging. After just a few days on this new medication, she came back and said something I'll never forget. I've had a very different few days. I ate when I was hungry, and the rest of the time I did my schoolwork. For her, the medication didn't just numb a symptom, it gave her a sense of agency. It gave her back her frontal lobe, the part of the brain that says, wait, let's think about this. It gave her the capacity to be present. But here's the crucial lesson we learned. For combat veterans, the same medication often had little to no effect. Why? Because the imprint of trauma is so complex. While medication could be a powerful tool to help someone feel stable enough to do the work of therapy, it couldn't on its own rewrite the learned helplessness or process the frozen memories. A pill can change your chemistry, but it can't teach your body that it's safe to feel again. These three revolutions, understanding the impact of life experience, the power and limits of medication, and the biology of learned helplessness, taught us a humbling lesson. The brain is not a simple machine to be fixed with a chemical. It is a living, adapting organ that is shaped by our experiences, our relationships, and our struggles. Healing wouldn't be found in a pill bottle alone, but in the much more challenging and much more human task of restoring a sense of safety and control. It forced us to look beyond the textbook and into the entirety of the human experience, body, mind, and brain together, and that journey was just beginning. So we arrived at a critical crossroads. We understood that trauma changed people, and we had begun to understand the chemistry behind those changes, but we were still looking at the outside of the locked box. We needed to see inside. And then, in the 1990s, the technology finally caught up to our questions. We were given a key. For the first time in human history, we could watch the living, feeling brain as it remembered, as it felt, as it suffered. This was the neuroscience revolution, and it changed everything. I want to tell you about a woman named Marcia. 13 years before she came to our lab, Marcia had been in a car accident. She had reached over to fix her young daughter's seatbelt, ran a red light, and was hit by another car. Her 5-year-old daughter was killed instantly. The baby she was carrying in her womb died later in the ambulance. In a single moment, her life was shattered. When Marcia agreed to be one of the first people to lie in a brain scanner while we helped her relive that day, I wasn't sure what we would see. We had carefully worked with her to create a short audio recording, a script that captured the sensory details of the accident, the sound of the beeping seatbelt alarm, the sight of the other car, the crushing impact. The moment we started playing that recording in the scanner, her body responded as if she were back in that car 13 years ago. Her heart rate skyrocketed, her blood pressure shot up. Her body was telling the story her mind struggled to articulate. And when we saw the scans, we finally had a picture of a brain in the grip of a trauma memory. And what we saw was both startling and heartbreaking. The first thing that lit up was a deep central part of the brain called the amygdala. Think of the amygdala as the brain's smoke detector. Its only job is to ask one question, over and over. Am I safe? When it senses a threat, it triggers the alarm. The rush of adrenaline, the pounding heart, the surge of fear that prepares you to fight or run. In Marcia's scan, her smoke detector was screaming. It was reacting to a memory from 13 years ago, as if it were happening right then and there. Her body was ready for a crash that had already happened. But the most surprising finding was what went dark. In the left front part of her brain, an area called Broca's area, which is essential for speech and language, had virtually shut down. It went offline. This was the biological explanation for something survivors had described for centuries: speechless horror. When terror takes over, words vanish. We see this in emergency rooms when assault victims sit in frozen silence. We see it in children who lose their voices after a frightening event. The brain's alarm system is so powerful that it literally knocks out the power to the speech center. You cannot put your terror into words because the part of your brain that creates language is offline. The experience is stored not as a story with a beginning, middle, and end, but as isolated fragments, images, sounds, and physical sensations. And there was one more profound discovery. The entire right side of Marcia's brain, the intuitive, emotional, visual side, was lit up like a Christmas tree. But the left side, the logical, analytical, linguistic side, was quiet. Her brain was split. You can think of it like this. The right brain holds the music of our experience, the emotions, the sensations, the visceral feelings. The left brain provides the liner notes, the story, the sequence, the context that explains the music. In trauma, this connection is severed. The right brain is flooded with the terrifying music of the past, while the left brain cannot provide the calming context that says, that was then and this is now. This is why when someone is triggered, they don't just feel a little upset. They are often engulfed. They are furious, terrified, or numb, but they can't necessarily explain why. They have lost the capacity to observe themselves and say, I am having a reaction to a memory. For them, in that moment, it is not a memory, it is happening all over again. When Marcia came out of the scanner, she looked defeated, drawn. Her shoulders were hunched, her breathing was shallow. She was the very picture of defenselessness. The scan had given us invaluable knowledge, but it had cost her. It showed us that reliving trauma is not a metaphor. It is a biological reality. The past is not past. But this bleak picture also contained the seeds of hope. If we could see the problem so clearly, perhaps we could find a way to help the brain rewire itself. If we understood that trauma memories are stored as disconnected sensory fragments, then maybe talking alone wasn't the only answer. Maybe we needed to find ways to access those fragments, not through language, which fails in the face of terror, but through other pathways, through the body itself, through the senses, through the very channels that the trauma had hijacked. The neuroscience revolution gave us a map. It showed us the precise locations of the wreckage. And with that map in hand, we could finally stop blaming people for being stuck in the past, and instead begin the compassionate work of helping them find their way back to the present. It was no longer about what was wrong with them, but about what had happened to their brains and bodies, and what we could do to help them heal. Now that we've seen how trauma reshapes the mind, we need to look at where it lives. We need to understand the landscape. This is where our journey takes us inside, to the very organ that creates our experience of reality. This is your brain on trauma. I want you to picture your brain not as a single unit, but as a team, a committee, built over millions of years of evolution. It develops from the bottom up, and each layer has a different job, a different voice. At the base, deep in the core, is what we can call the reptilian brain. This is the oldest part. It's all about basic life support. It manages your heartbeat, your breathing, your hunger, your sleep. It's the fundamental housekeeping that keeps the lights on. It's also the source of your most primitive defensive impulses. When this part is in charge, you are all instinct. Sitting right on top of that is the limbic system, or the mammalian brain. This is the seat of your emotions. It's where you feel love, fear, anger, joy. It's also your internal alarm center, constantly scanning the world for what's pleasurable or scary, what's safe or dangerous. This part of the brain is deeply concerned with attachment and connection. It is why a baby cries for its mother, and why we feel comforted by a loved one's touch. And then, finally, we have the neocortex, the crowning glory of the human brain, with the frontal lobes as its CEO. This is the part that develops last. It's the rational, logical you. It allows you to plan for the future, to use language, to reflect on yourself, to feel empathy. It's the part that can say, I am feeling angry, rather than just lashing out. It is the wise leader that can soothe the emotional limbic brain and manage the primitive impulses from the reptilian brain. In a well-functioning system, these three parts work in beautiful harmony. The CEO keeps everything running smoothly, but trauma shatters this harmony. Imagine a situation of sudden, overwhelming threat. Let's say you're in a car, and you see another vehicle swerve into your lane. In a split second, the emotional brain, the alarm center, screams, "Danger!" It immediately hijacks the system. It shunts energy away from the thoughtful CEO and sends it down to the older, faster brain structures to initiate a survival response. Your body is flooded with energy to fight, flee, or freeze. This is a brilliant life-saving design. It happens in an instant, before your conscious mind has even fully registered what's happening. But for a traumatized person, this hijacking becomes a constant state of affairs. The alarm center, the smoke detector, becomes hypersensitive. It starts seeing danger everywhere. It reacts to a raised voice, a certain facial expression, a tone of voice, as if they were life-threatening events. And each time it screams, it weakens the CEO, the frontal lobes, the very part of the brain you need to calm yourself down, to assess the situation logically, to say, that was then, this is now, is taken offline. This is why you can't simply reason your way out of a trauma response. You can talk someone down from a flashback because the part of their brain that processes language and logic has been temporarily disabled. The rational brain is essentially powerless to argue with the emotional brain. The person is all music and no liner notes, all sensation and no story. This brings me to a crucial concept, neuroception. It's a term coined by the brilliant scientist Stephen Porges. It describes your nervous system's subconscious ability to scan for safety and danger. It's what makes you feel comfortable in a friend's cozy living room, but tense in a dark alley. It's that gut feeling. In trauma, neuroception is broken. The system is miscalibrated. It constantly misreads safety as danger. A kind, smiling face can feel threatening. A gentle touch can feel like an assault. This is not a conscious choice. It's a deep physical miscalculation. The internal wiring is sending false alarms. Let me share the stories of Stan and Ute, a couple who were in a horrific multi-car pileup. They were trapped in their vehicle, surrounded by chaos and death. Afterward, they both came for brain scans. We had them listen to a recording that recreated the accident. Stan's brain during the scan looked exactly like Marsha's from our earlier story. His amygdala, his smoke detector, was blazing. His speech center went dark. He was reliving the crash. He came out sweating, his heart racing. But Ute's scan was completely different. Her brain didn't light up. It shut down. Almost every region showed dramatically decreased activity. When she came out, she said she felt nothing, just like she had at the time of the accident. This is the other side of the trauma response. It's not always fight or flight. When those are not options, when you are truly trapped, the body has a final, last-ditch defense: collapse. It's the reptilian brain taking over, shutting down metabolism, conserving energy, and disconnecting from the unbearable reality. This is dissociation. It's the body saying, if I cannot escape, I will make myself disappear. So we see two fundamental patterns, one of hyperarousal, where the person is flooded with the energy of survival, and one of hypoarousal, where the system shuts down into a protective numbness. Many people oscillate painfully between these two states, between raging panic and feeling completely dead inside. The tragedy is that both states make it impossible to be fully present in your life. They rob you of the ability to feel joy, to engage in truly reciprocal relationships, to play, to explore. The brain becomes so focused on managing the internal chaos that there is little energy left for spontaneous, joyful engagement with the world. But understanding this is not a life sentence. It is a diagnosis of a system that is stuck. And if a system can get stuck, it can, with the right conditions, become unstuck. The brain is not a static organ. It possesses a miraculous quality known as neuroplasticity, the ability to rewire itself based on experience. The question then becomes not, what's wrong with you, but how can we help your brain and body relearn safety? How can we help the smoke detector recalibrate? How can we strengthen the CEO so it can stay online during moments of distress? How can we help the body complete the defensive responses that were thwarted during the original event? The answers to these questions lie not just in talking, but in experiencing, in having new, visceral experiences of safety, of mastery, of connection, that can slowly, gently teach the old brain a new way of being. That is the path forward, and it is where our hope lies. We've been exploring how trauma changes the brain. But to truly understand it, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to talk about what survival actually looks like in the human body. This isn't about psychology, it's about biology. It's about the ancient, hardwired blueprint we all share for staying alive. I want to tell you about two different responses to danger. The first comes from a 5-year-old boy named Noam. On September 11th, 2001, he was in a school near the World Trade Center. He saw the plane hit the tower from his classroom window. He saw the fire, the smoke, the unimaginable chaos. He ran with his teacher and his classmates, and he was reunited with his father. Together, they fled through the falling ash and debris. The next day, he drew a picture. He drew the plane, the tower, the fire. But at the bottom of the page, he drew something else, a black circle. When asked what it was, he said, "A trampoline." Why? So that the next time when people have to jump, they will be safe. This little boy, witness to one of the most terrifying events in modern history, did two things that are the absolute cornerstones of healthy survival. First, he was able to take effective action. He ran, he escaped. His body's fight or flight response was utilized perfectly. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And second, once he reached the safety of his family, his alarm system quieted down. This allowed his mind, his beautiful, creative mind, to process what he had seen. He didn't just replay the horror, he imagined a solution. He used his imagination to begin to heal. Now, let's contrast that with Tom, the veteran we met earlier. Tom's body also mobilized an incredible survival response during the ambush in the rice paddy. But in his case, the action was thwarted. There was no effective escape in that moment. He couldn't fight back the enemy single-handedly. He couldn't run away from the bullets. He was trapped in a situation of inescapable shock. And this is the critical difference. When our survival responses are completed, when we can successfully fight or flee from danger, the body's cycle of arousal completes itself. The adrenaline surges and then it recedes. The heart rate goes up and then it comes down. The body returns to a state of equilibrium. We recover our senses. But when the response is blocked, when we are held down, trapped, or otherwise prevented from taking that effective action, the cycle cannot complete. The brain keeps sending signals to the body to escape a threat that no longer exists. The nervous system gets stuck in the on position. The energy of survival has nowhere to go. It gets trapped inside. This is what we mean when we say the body keeps the score. It's not a metaphor. It's a literal physiological reality. The body continues to defend against a threat that belongs to the past. The person may look like they are sitting quietly in a room, but inside, their internal world is still a battlefield. This trapped energy manifests in different ways. For some, it becomes a constant state of fight or flight, a relentless inner agitation, irritability, and panic. For others, when the mobilization fails completely, the body resorts to its oldest, most primitive defense, the freeze response. It's like a mouse playing dead when caught by a cat. The system shuts down. It conserves energy. This is the root of that feeling of numbness, of dissociation, of feeling dead to the world. I was once part of a research group that studied this in animals. Dogs were subjected to inescapable electric shocks. At first, they tried everything to get away. But after learning that nothing they did could stop the pain, they gave up. Later, when the door to their cage was left wide open and the shocks started again, they didn't even try to escape. They just lay there, whimpering. They had learned that action was futile. This is called learned helplessness. And it is a perfect picture of what happens in trauma. The person learns on a deep, visceral level that they are helpless, that there is no point in trying. This isn't a cognitive belief you can talk someone out of. It is a biological lesson etched into the nervous system. This explains why so many traumatized people find themselves reenacting aspects of their trauma. They might seek out dangerous situations or volatile relationships. Why would anyone do that? Because, paradoxically, when you are in a real external crisis, it can make the internal chaos make sense. The adrenaline rush, the hyper-alertness, finally have a clear target. For a brief moment you feel fully alive and in control. It's a painful and destructive solution, but it's the body's attempt to complete the stuck survival cycle, to finally have a fight or a flight that has a resolution. Healing from trauma, then, is not about erasing the past. It is about helping the body complete its unfinished business. It is about terminating that continued state of stress mobilization and restoring the entire organism to a felt sense of safety. It's about convincing the deepest parts of our being that the war is over. This is why therapies that only focus on talking and understanding often fall short. We have to speak to the body in its own language. We have to provide experiences that deeply and viscerally contradict the helplessness and rage that resulted from the trauma. We have to create opportunities for the body to rediscover its capacity for effective action, whether that's through learning self-defense, through yoga, through rhythmic drumming, or even through simply learning to notice and regulate your own breath. The goal is to become like little Noam, to help the body feel so safe and so grounded in the present that the mind is free to do what it does best, to imagine, to create, and to find new, life-affirming ways to move forward. It's about moving from being a prisoner of the past to becoming the author of your present. We've been talking about the brain and the body as if they are separate, but that's the very illusion we need to dissolve. They are not separate. They are in a constant, intimate, whispering conversation. And to understand trauma, we need to learn the language of that conversation. It's a language we all speak, but often don't realize we know. You feel it when your heart feels like it's going to beat out of your chest before you have to give a speech. You feel it when a wave of relief washes over you, and you let out a deep sigh you didn't even know you were holding. You feel it in that gut-wrenching feeling of loss, or the warm, open feeling in your chest when you feel safe with someone you love. These aren't just metaphors. They are literal, physical reports from the front lines of your experience. The brain is not just in your head, it's in your heart, it's in your gut, it's in every nerve that tells you where you are in space. The great naturalist Charles Darwin was fascinated by this. Over a century ago, he wrote about what he called the pneumogastric nerve. This is the vagus nerve, a vast, intricate network that wanders from your brainstem down through your heart, your lungs, and deep into your gut. It's the main information superhighway between your brain and your body. And Darwin observed that when the mind is strongly excited, it instantly affects the state of the viscera, your gut, your heart, and vice versa. There is a constant mutual action and reaction. This is why we say we feel heartbreak. This is why we have gut feelings. This is why anxiety can tie your stomach in knots. Your body is not just a container for your brain, it is a partner in a continuous dialogue. This conversation is managed by a brilliant system called the autonomic nervous system. Think of it as the dual control system for your body's energy. It has two main branches, like an accelerator and a brake. The sympathetic nervous system is the accelerator. It's the gas pedal for action. It's what gets your heart pumping and your muscles ready when you need to run from danger or meet a deadline. It's the biology of fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system is the brake. It's the system of rest and digest. It slows your heart rate, deepens your breathing, and allows your body to turn its energy inward for healing, for digestion, for connection. A healthy, resilient life is a beautiful, fluid dance between the gas and the brake. You press the gas to engage with the world, and you press the brake to rest and restore. But trauma throws this entire system out of balance. For a traumatized person, the accelerator is often stuck. The body is constantly ready for a threat, leading to that feeling of being always on edge, irritable, and unable to relax. But sometimes, the problem is the opposite. The brake is slammed on too hard. This is the collapse response, the shutdown, the numbness we talked about. The pioneering work of Stephen Porges gave us a much more sophisticated map of this system with his polyvagal theory. He helped us see that there isn't just one brake. There's a sophisticated, evolved braking system specifically for social connection. The most evolved part of this system, the ventral vagal complex, is the nerve of connection. It's active when we feel safe. It coordinates the tiny muscles of our face that let us make eye contact and give a genuine, warm smile. It regulates our voice, making it melodic and inviting. It sends signals to our heart and lungs to keep us calm and steady. When this social engagement system is online, we are open, curious, and ready to connect with others. We can give and receive comfort. But when we sense a threat, this system is the first to go offline. You can see it in a baby who starts to cry, their face flushes, their voice becomes strained. They are signaling for help. If help doesn't come, the older, more primitive systems take over. The accelerator kicks in, fight or flight. And if that fails, the most ancient brake of all, the dorsal vagal complex, pulls us into shutdown, into collapse. It's a biological descent from social engagement to mobilization to immobilization. Let me give you an example from my practice. A patient I'll call Sherry had a childhood of profound emotional neglect. She felt unseen and unwanted. As an adult, she felt chronically numb and disconnected. She would sometimes pick at the skin on her arms until she bled. When I asked her why, she said it was one of the only ways she could feel something, anything at all. She was so disconnected from her body's internal sensations that she had to create intense physical pain just to feel alive. She started working with a massage therapist. During one of their first sessions, the therapist was simply holding her feet. Sherry, with her eyes closed, suddenly yelled out in a panic, "Where are you?" She had completely lost track of the therapist's presence, even though the therapist's hands were still on her feet. Her social engagement system was so fragile, her sense of connection so tenuous, that she couldn't maintain it without constant visual proof. This is what a dysregulated nervous system looks like. It's not just about big emotions. It's about a fundamental inability to feel safely embodied and connected to others. This also explains why so many of our attempts to help can sometimes backfire. If we try to reason with someone, to talk them down, when their social engagement system is offline and their body is in full survival mode, it's like speaking French to someone who only understands Mandarin. The words don't land. The brain isn't processing language. It's preparing for battle or retreat. Healing, then, must involve recalibrating this entire system. We have to find ways to speak to the body in a language it understands, beneath words. This is why something as simple as rhythmic breathing can be so powerful, because the breath is one of the few functions that is both automatic and under our conscious control. When you focus on a long, slow exhale, you are gently pressing on the brake pedal of your nervous system. You are sending a direct message of safety. This is why group activities like choir singing, drumming, or yoga can be so transformative. They aren't just hobbies. They are exercises in co-regulation. They are practices where we synchronize our breath and our movements with others, which directly stimulates that social engagement system. We are literally practicing safety and connection in real time. The goal is to move from a state of constant defense to a state of grounded presence. It's to help the body learn that it can press the brake without fear, that it can relax its vigilance, that it can once again trust the world and the people in it. It's a journey back into the wisdom of the body, to rediscover that deep, visceral sense of belonging to yourself and to the human community. If the body and brain are in a constant whispering conversation, what happens when you stop being able to hear your own body? What happens when the connection goes silent? This is perhaps the most profound and unsettling consequence of trauma, the slow, quiet drift away from the self. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Sarah. When Sarah walked into my office, her story wasn't just in her words, it was in her posture. Her shoulders were slumped, her head was bowed, as if she were carrying a weight so heavy she couldn't possibly look up at the world. She told me she often felt like a ghost in her own life, watching herself go through the motions. She had a good job, a comfortable home, but it all felt distant, like she was watching a movie of someone else's life. The most distressing thing for her was a compulsive habit of picking at the skin on her arms. She knew it was damaging. She felt deep shame about it, but she said it was the only thing that made her feel real. The sharp, physical sensation was a desperate anchor to a body she otherwise couldn't feel. She was so numb that she had to create pain just to prove to herself that she was still there. This is what we mean by losing your body. It's not a metaphorical idea. It's a literal disconnection from the very source of our being. The stream of internal sensation, the feeling of your breath in your lungs, the beat of your heart, the subtle tensions and relaxations in your muscles, this is the foundation of our sense of self. It's the wordless knowledge that you inhabit your own body. And for Sarah, that stream had been reduced to a trickle. We see this in brain scans. When researchers look at the brains of people with deep histories of trauma while they are simply at rest, something remarkable and tragic shows up. The areas of the brain responsible for self-awareness, for feeling your own body from the inside, are quiet, dimmed. There's a lack of activation in the very regions that give you the sense that you are you. Think of these areas as your internal GPS. They tell you where you are, how you're feeling, what you need. They help you answer the most basic questions. Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I safe? Do I like this person? Without this internal guidance system, you are left navigating the world based on external cues alone. You look to other people to tell you how you should feel. You become a stranger to yourself. This is why so many people who have experienced trauma have such trouble making decisions. It's not that they can't think logically, it's that they can't access the internal compass of their gut feelings. They don't know what they want because they can't feel what their body is telling them. They might stay in a job or a relationship that is draining them because they lack the visceral signal that says, this is harming you. Or they might push away something good because the sensation of safety and pleasure is so unfamiliar, it feels threatening. This condition even has a name, alexithymia. It's a Greek word that means no words for feelings. It's not that people don't have emotions. It's that they can't identify them or describe them. If you ask someone with alexithymia how they would feel if they saw a truck speeding toward them, they might not say, I'd be terrified. They would say, I'd get out of the way. They translate emotions directly into action, or they experience them as unexplained physical symptoms, a sudden headache, a knot in the stomach, a wave of fatigue. The emotion has no story, it just has a physical effect. I remember one patient who would only realize he was angry hours after a conflict, when he'd notice his jaw was sore from clenching it. His body was keeping the score of his anger, but his conscious mind was completely unaware of the game. The ultimate expression of this disconnection is depersonalization. This is when people feel completely detached from their own body or mental processes. It's as if they are floating above themselves, watching their life from a distance. One person described it to me as living in a tunnel, a fog, where everything, good or bad, feels the same. Numbness, nothing. This isn't a choice. It's the body's final, desperate defense against unbearable pain. If you can't escape the terror, you escape from yourself. You leave your body behind as a protective shell. The problem is, once the danger is past, it can be incredibly difficult to find your way back. So, how do you come home to yourself? The path back is not through thinking, but through sensing. Healing begins when we learn to befriend the body we abandoned. It starts with small, gentle steps. It might begin with simply noticing the feeling of your feet on the floor, or paying attention to the rhythm of your breath without trying to change it. It's about learning to identify the physical sensations that lie beneath the emotions. Instead of saying, I am anxious, you might learn to notice, there is a fluttering in my chest and a tightness in my shoulders. This can be frightening at first. For people who have spent a lifetime disconnected, turning the volume up on internal sensations can feel like opening a floodgate. They might be afraid of being overwhelmed by the very feelings they worked so hard to escape. That's why this process must be done gently, with compassion, and often with guidance. The goal is to re-inhabit your body, to become a friendly occupant of your own skin, to learn its language, to listen to its whispers so that it doesn't have to scream. When you can feel the full range of sensations in your body, from the pleasant warmth of the sun on your skin to the uncomfortable clench of anger in your gut, you regain your agency. You regain your ability to know what you feel, and from that place you can begin to know what you need. It is a journey from being a stranger in your own life to becoming its author. It is the slow, courageous process of turning the lights back on, room by room, until you are fully present in the home of yourself. We've been exploring the landscape of the traumatized brain and body, but now we must travel to the place where that landscape is first formed. We have to talk about the minds of children. This is where the blueprint of the self is drawn, and where trauma can fundamentally alter the architecture of a human life. I want to tell you about a study we did many years ago. We showed a group of children simple pictures cut from magazines and asked them to tell us a story about what was happening. One card showed a seemingly happy scene, a father working on a car with two smiling children watching him. The children from stable, loving homes saw a family project. They told stories about the dad fixing the car so they could all go get ice cream or visit grandma. They imagined a positive future, but the children from the clinic, the ones with histories of severe abuse and neglect, saw something entirely different. One little girl said the little girl in the picture was about to smash her father's skull in with a hammer. A boy who had been repeatedly beaten described in graphic detail how the boy would kick away the jack, crushing his father with blood spurting everywhere. These weren't just bad stories. They were a window into their inner world. For these children, the entire world was a dangerous place. Even a picture of a father fixing a car, a symbol of care and competence for most kids, was instantly interpreted through a lens of threat, violence, and betrayal. Their minds were supercomputers for danger, constantly scanning for the next potential assault. There was no room for imagination, for play, for the simple trust that the world could be a safe and interesting place. This is the first and most devastating impact of trauma on a child. It shatters their sense of safety and warps their map of reality. But to understand how this happens, we have to understand the most important force in a child's universe: attachment. From the moment we are born, we are wired for connection. Our survival depends on it. A baby's brain is not yet developed enough to regulate its own emotions or bodily states. It is the caregiver who does this. When a baby is hungry, a breast or bottle arrives. When she is cold, she is swaddled. When he is frightened, he is rocked and soothed. This is how we learn to self-regulate. Our nervous system is calibrated by the nervous system of our caregivers. This beautiful rhythmic dance is called attunement. It's the tiny moment-to-moment exchanges, the coos, the smiles, the gentle touch, that tell an infant, "I see you, you exist, you matter." When a mother looks at her baby with loving eyes and the baby gazes back, they are building the neural pathways for connection. The baby's brain is learning that relationship is a source of comfort and pleasure. But what happens when the source of safety is also the source of fear? This is the unsolvable dilemma for so many abused and neglected children. You are wired to run to your parent for comfort, but your parent is the one who is terrifying you. So what do? The brilliant researcher Mary Main identified this pattern and called it disorganized attachment. It's fright without a solution. You can see it in young children. When their parent enters the room, instead of running toward them or even away from them, they might just freeze. Or they might start to approach, then fall to the floor, or they might rock back and forth in a trance. They are caught between two irreconcilable impulses, the biological instinct to seek comfort and the primal instinct to escape danger. Their internal GPS is giving them two conflicting commands at once, and the system short-circuits. This early blueprint becomes the template for all future relationships. Children with secure attachment learn that the world is basically safe and that people can be trusted. They develop an internal locus of control, a sense that their actions can influence their world. They are the kids on the playground who can share, who can stand up for themselves, and who can feel empathy for others. But children with disorganized or insecure attachments learn very different lessons. Some learn to avoid connection altogether. They become the tough kids, the bullies, the ones who seem not to care, but inside their hearts are racing. They are dealing but not feeling. Others become anxious and clingy, constantly testing and demanding attention. They are feeling but not dealing. They have learned that unless they make a spectacle, they will be ignored. The tragedy is that these are brilliant adaptations. They are the best possible strategies a child could devise to survive in an environment that is unpredictable, frightening, or devoid of love. The problem is that these survival strategies, so necessary in childhood, become massive liabilities in the adult world. The avoidant child becomes the adult who cannot sustain intimacy. The anxious child becomes the adult who is perpetually worried about abandonment. The child who dissociates becomes the adult who feels numb and disconnected from life. And this is why the effects of early trauma are so profound and long-lasting. It's not just about the events themselves, it's that these events disrupt the very foundation of the self. They damage the circuitry needed to feel safe inside one's own body, to manage emotions, to trust other people, and to navigate the social world. But here is where we find our greatest hope. The same principle that makes the child's brain so vulnerable also makes it incredibly resilient: neuroplasticity. The brain is built through experience, and if it was built through experiences of fear and neglect, it can be rebuilt through experiences of safety, attunement, and love. Healing a traumatized child or the wounded child within an adult isn't about analyzing the past. It's about providing the missing experiences in the present. It's about creating new, repetitive, consistent experiences of safety and connection that can slowly, gently rewire the old blueprint. It happens in the quiet moments. It's in the steady, patient presence of a therapist who doesn't flinch at a child's rage. It's in the rhythmic back and forth of tossing a ball, which teaches the nervous system the patterns of reciprocity. It's in the soothing tone of a voice that consistently responds with kindness. It's in helping a child or an adult finally complete that frozen, disorganized movement, to push away a threat in a self-defense class, to express a boundary with their voice, to finally feel the strength in their body that was taken from them. The mind of a child is a universe of potential. Trauma can darken that universe, but it cannot extinguish its fundamental nature, which is to grow, to connect, and to heal when given the right conditions. Our task is not to ask what is wrong with a child, but to ask what happened to them, and, more importantly, what they need right now to feel safe and real in the world. It is the most important work we can do. If the child's mind is a universe of potential, then the force that shapes that universe is the silent, rhythmic dance of connection. This isn't about grand gestures or expensive toys. It's about something far more fundamental. It's about getting on the same wavelength. This is the science and the soul of attachment and attunement. Before we can even speak, before we understand a single word, we are learning the language of relationship. It is our first language. A newborn, just hours old, can already imitate. If you stick out your tongue, they will stick out theirs. This isn't a party trick. This is the beginning of a conversation. It's the work of remarkable brain cells called mirror neurons, which act like neural Wi-Fi, allowing us to feel into the state of another person. This conversation is built on attunement. Attunement is that exquisite sense of being felt and understood by another person. It happens in the tiny, almost imperceptible moments. I remember watching a mother with her 2-month-old son through a one-way mirror. They were cooing and smiling, having a wonderful, wordless conversation. The mother leaned in to nuzzle him, and in his excitement, The baby grabbed a fistful of her hair and pulled hard. The mother, caught by surprise, yelped in pain and her face momentarily contorted with frustration. In that instant, the baby's face crumpled. He was terrified. He brought his hands up to his eyes, blocking out the sight of his angry mother. The source of his delight had suddenly become a source of fear. The connection was broken. But then, something beautiful happened. The mother, seeing his distress, caught herself. She softened her face. She started making gentle, soothing sounds. She reached for him. The baby, peeking through his fingers, saw her concerned expression. She began to tickle his belly, and he broke into a giggle. The connection was restored. This entire sequence, from harmony to rupture to repair and back to harmony, took less than 12 seconds. This is the essential rhythm of secure attachment. It's not about perfection, it's about repair. It's the repeated experience that when connection breaks, as it inevitably will, it can be fixed. The child learns that distress is manageable and that they are not alone in their feelings. Their nervous system learns to move from a state of alarm back to a state of calm. This is the foundation of all self-regulation. The famous pediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott called this the holding environment. It's not just about physical holding, though, that is part of it. It's the total emotional atmosphere created by the caregiver. A good enough mother, he said, is one who is generally attuned to her baby's needs. She meets the baby's gestures and sounds with her own responsive sounds and touches. Through this, the baby develops a sense that their body is a place where their self lives. They feel real. But when this attunement is consistently missing, the child faces a profound dilemma. Their biological instinct is to attach, to seek comfort from their caregiver. But if the caregiver is the source of fear, neglect, or chaos, the child has no safe solution. They can't approach, and they can't flee. So their system does the only thing it can. It short-circuits. Researchers can see this in a simple experiment called the strange situation. A mother and her infant are in a playroom. The mother leaves for a few minutes, and then returns. Securely attached children are distressed when she leaves, but are visibly comforted and quickly return to play when she comes back. Their safe base has returned. But insecurely attached children show very different patterns. Some are avoidant. They seem not to care when their mother leaves or returns. They turn away from her. But here's the fascinating part. Their heart rates are racing. They are dealing with their distress by shutting down their feelings. They are dealing but not feeling. Other children are anxious or ambivalent. They become intensely upset when the mother leaves. But when she returns, they are angry and clingy, unable to be comforted or to return to play. They are feeling, but not dealing. They have learned that their needs are not met consistently, so they must amplify their distress to get a response. And then there are the children with disorganized attachment. These are often the children who have been abused or severely neglected. When their mother returns, they don't know what to do. They might start to approach her, then suddenly freeze and fall to the floor. They might spin in a circle or go into a trance-like state. They are caught in an unsolvable paradox. The person they need for safety is the person they are afraid of. This is fright without a solution. These early attachment patterns become the blueprints for our adult lives. The securely attached child becomes the adult who can enjoy intimacy and autonomy. They can ask for help when they need it and are comfortable relying on others. The avoidant child often becomes the adult who is out of touch with their emotions and struggles with intimacy. They may be highly successful in their work, but their relationships feel superficial. The anxious child becomes the adult who is perpetually worried about their relationships, needing constant reassurance and fearing abandonment. And the child with a disorganized attachment often becomes the adult who feels fragmented, who struggles with a stable sense of self. and for whom relationships are a source of both craving and terror. But let me be very clear, this is not about blaming parents. Most parents are doing the very best they can with the resources and the internal blueprints they themselves have. This is about understanding patterns, and the most hopeful thing we have learned from all of this research is that these blueprints are not carved in stone. The brain is plastic throughout our lives. We can form new, corrective emotional experiences. A loving partner, a devoted teacher, a supportive therapist, a close friend. Any consistent, attuned relationship can help rewire those old patterns. It creates new experiences of rupture and repair. It teaches the nervous system, sometimes for the first time, what it feels like to be on a safe wavelength with another human being. Healing happens when we find people with whom we can be in rhythm. When our internal state is recognized and met by another, it's in that moment of being truly seen and understood that we can begin to feel real, to feel safe, and to finally come home to ourselves. We've seen how the secure, rhythmic dance of attachment builds a healthy mind. But what happens when the very relationship that is supposed to be a safe harbor becomes the source of the storm? What is the cost when a child is trapped not by walls, but by the people they depend on for survival? This is the painful reality for countless children. The trauma of abuse and neglect is not a single event that happens to a child. It is a poisonous atmosphere that they are forced to breathe, day in and day out. It's a trap from which there is no escape, because the jailer is also the person you are wired to love. I want to tell you about a young man I'll call David. David grew up with a father who was prone to violent, unpredictable rages. There was no pattern, no way to know what would trigger him. One moment the house could be quiet, and the next his father would be screaming, throwing things, his face contorted with a fury that seemed to come from nowhere. As a little boy, David's survival brain did what it was designed to do. It became a supercomputer for predicting danger. He learned to read the subtlest signs, the sound of his father's key in the lock, the tone of his voice when he said, "Hello," the way he set his briefcase down. David's entire inner world became organized around managing his father's emotions. He made himself small. He stayed in his room. He learned to be perfectly quiet. He became a master of appeasement, trying to soothe the beast before the storm could break. This was a brilliant survival strategy. It likely prevented him from being physically hurt on many occasions, but the cost was astronomical. David's brain and body were in a constant state of high alert. The internal smoke detector wasn't just sensitive, it was welded to the on position. He never learned what it felt like to be relaxed in his own home, in his own skin. This is the first and most insidious cost of relational trauma. The child must sacrifice their own inner world to manage the outer one. Their own needs, their own feelings, their own sense of self all become secondary to the overwhelming task of staying safe. They learn to ignore their gut feelings, their hunger, their fear, their anger, because paying attention to themselves is a luxury they cannot afford. They are, in a very real sense, losing themselves to survive. And this creates a devastating confusion that can last a lifetime. How are you supposed to feel about the person who is both your protector and your persecutor? For a child, this is an impossible puzzle to solve. The brain tries to make sense of it by splitting the experience. The parent might be seen as good, and the child takes on the belief that they themselves are bad, deserving of the punishment. Or they may learn to dissociate, to disconnect from their body and their feelings during the abuse, so that they can still, in some way, receive the care they desperately need from that same person afterward. This is why the phrase "I love you" from an abuser is so psychologically destructive. It ties love to terror, care to cruelty. It wires the brain to associate intimacy with danger. For a child in this situation, love does not feel safe. It feels terrifying. This faulty wiring becomes the template for all future relationships. As adults, people like David often find themselves drawn to what is familiar, not what is healthy. Their neuroception, their internal danger radar, is calibrated to the chaos of their childhood. A calm, stable, predictable partner might feel boring or even suspicious because their nervous system is waiting for the other shoe to drop. They may instead be drawn to partners who are volatile or emotionally unavailable, because that intense, unstable dynamic feels like home. It feels like love. I once worked with a woman, Elena, who had a history of childhood neglect. Her mother was emotionally absent, lost in her own depression. Elena learned that the only way to get a flicker of attention was to be in crisis. She became a high achiever, but she was also chronically anxious and prone to dramatic emotional collapses. In her adult relationships, she would subconsciously create crises to see if her partner would truly show up for her. She was testing them, recreating the old dynamic, desperately trying to get the care she never received as a child, but going about it in a way that often pushed people away. She was trapped in a loop, trying to solve a problem from the past with people in the present. The body keeps a precise physical score of this relational trauma. We see it in a heightened startle response, in digestive problems, in chronic pain, in an immune system that is constantly on edge. The body is always braced for impact. It never learned how to fully rest. The system of fight or flight, or the collapse into freeze, becomes not a temporary state, but a permanent trait. The healing journey for someone trapped in these patterns is profound. It's not about finding the right partner. It is about first returning home to themselves. It's about slowly, gently, learning to recalibrate their internal danger radar. It begins with helping them to identify the physical sensations in their body and to name their emotions. For many, this is like learning a foreign language. They have to discover the difference between anger and fear, between sadness and hunger. They have to learn to trust the very gut feelings they were taught to ignore. It continues by creating new, corrective experiences of relationship. In the safety of a therapeutic relationship, they can experience what it's like to be with someone who is consistent, predictable, and non-threatening. They can learn that a rupture in connection can be repaired without drama or violence. They can practice setting a small boundary and see that the world does not end. They can, perhaps for the first time, feel felt by another person without a sense of impending danger. This is how we begin to break the trap. Not by force, but by cultivating a new kind of strength, the strength of vulnerability in a context of safety. It is the long, courageous process of teaching the body and the mind that it is possible to be connected to another human being and to be connected to yourself at the very same time. It is the journey from being a prisoner of your past relationships to becoming the architect of your future. What's love got to do with it? It's not just a lyric from a song. It's one of the most urgent questions at the heart of healing. If our earliest relationships can cause such deep wounds, what role do later relationships play in our recovery? Is love just a feeling, or is it something more biological, more essential? To answer that, we have to look at what love actually is from the perspective of our nervous system. For a newborn baby, love isn't a bouquet of flowers or a box of chocolates. Love is a regulation of states. It is the feeling of a calm heartbeat against theirs. It is the sound of a soothing voice that settles their crying. It is the gentle rock that lulls them to sleep. Love is the biological process of a regulated, attuned caregiver helping a dysregulated, distressed little nervous system find its way back to calm. This is the foundation. Love is the first and most important survival system. It's what teaches us that the world is safe, that our needs matter, and that connection is a source of comfort. But when this early environment is marked by fear, neglect, or chaos, love gets wired to danger. The child's brain, in its desperate need to attach, makes a tragic association. It learns that love is intertwined with fear, that closeness means pain, that depending on someone means you might be abandoned or betrayed. This faulty wiring becomes the template for adult relationships. I once worked with a woman, Clara, who had a relentless pattern. She would be drawn to charismatic, intense men who would pursue her passionately. For a short while it felt like a fairy tale, but inevitably they would become critical, controlling, or emotionally distant. And she would stay. She would twist herself into knots, trying to become perfect enough to win back their initial affection. She confused the intense roller coaster drama of these relationships for passion. She thought the constant anxiety in her stomach was a sign of how much she loved him. What was actually happening was that her nervous system was recognizing a familiar pattern. The intermittent reinforcement, the intense pursuit, followed by withdrawal, mirrored the unpredictable environment of her childhood. Her body was trying to solve an old problem, to finally get the love and safety she never received by reliving the same dynamic. The drama felt like home. The calm, stable affection of a truly kind partner felt unfamiliar, and to her, it felt boring. It didn't match her internal blueprint for what love was supposed to feel like. This is the great tragedy of developmental trauma. It doesn't just hurt you in the past, it installs a faulty GPS for love that guides you toward familiar sources of pain, mistaking them for destinations of safety. So what's love got to do with healing? Everything, but it's not the dramatic, romantic love of the movies. The love that heals is something quieter, more consistent, and more profound. Healing love is a safe connection that provides a corrective emotional experience. It's a relationship, whether with a therapist, a partner, or a close friend, that consistently proves your old blueprint wrong. It's the experience of setting a small boundary and having the other person respect it. It's the experience of having a bad day and having someone sit with you without trying to fix you. It's the experience of making a mistake and not being met with rage or contempt, but with understanding. It's the experience of someone seeing your pain and not looking away. These moments are not just emotionally comforting, they are biologically transformative. Each time you have a positive, attuned experience in a relationship, you are literally rewiring your brain. You are strengthening the neural pathways for safety and connection. You are teaching your amygdala that it can stand down. You are giving your prefrontal cortex, the wise leader, new evidence that it's safe to be vulnerable. This kind of love is not about finding your missing half. That is a Hollywood myth that often leads people to seek someone to complete them, which is an immense burden to place on another person. The love that heals is about two whole people choosing to connect. It's about moving from a state of needing someone to regulate you to a state of co-regulation, where you can each manage your own emotions, but you also create a shared space of safety and warmth that makes both your nervous systems feel more secure. This is why the therapeutic relationship can be so powerful. It is a dedicated space designed for this kind of co-regulation. It's a laboratory for practicing connection without the old dangers. But this process can happen in any committed, safe relationship. The path to healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a new present that is compelling enough and safe enough for your nervous system to invest in. It's about collecting enough evidence through enough small, consistent moments of attunement and respect that love does not have to hurt. That connection can be a source of strength, not of fear. It's about slowly, patiently answering that question, what's love got to do with it? With your entire being. The answer you arrive at is that love has everything to do with it. Not the love that is a storm, but the love that is the calm, steady ground upon which you can finally stand. It is the force that reminds you of your own worth and the connection that helps you feel real and finally, truly, at home. We've been talking about the wounds of trauma, but there is a specific kind of wound that is so pervasive, so fundamental, that it often goes unseen. It's not the result of a single shocking event. It's the result of a toxic environment that a child is forced to live in day after day with no escape. This is developmental trauma, and it is a hidden epidemic. Imagine a plant growing in a cellar. It doesn't get crushed by a single rock. It's starved of sunlight, of nutrients, of space. It becomes stunted, twisted, struggling to reach a light it can't see. This is what chronic abuse and neglect does to a developing child. It's not what happened to you on one terrible day. It's what was missing, or what was persistently poisonous every single day. This kind of trauma is so insidious because it doesn't just create a memory. It builds a faulty foundation for the entire self. It shapes the child's brain, their nervous system, their very capacity to feel and to connect from the ground up. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Leo. Leo came to me as an adult, successful by all outward measures, but he described feeling like an imposter in his own life. He had a hard time knowing what he felt or what he wanted. He would get into relationships, but he'd eventually feel smothered and pull away. He was easily startled and chronically irritable, but he couldn't explain why. When we explored his childhood, there was no single story of horrific abuse. Instead, it was a chronic, low-grade emotional famine. His parents were physically present but emotionally absent. His achievements were met with a nod, his distress with a dismissal. "You're too sensitive," they would say. His emotional world was never mirrored, never validated. He learned that to be loved, or at least to not be a burden, he had to shut down his own needs and feelings. His sense of self was built on a void. This is the core of developmental trauma. It's a disruption in the very process of becoming a person. A child in this situation isn't dealing with a threat that comes and goes. The environment itself is the threat. Their home is not a safe base. Their caregivers are not sources of comfort. So the child's brain and body adapt to this hostile environment by remaining in a constant state of low-grade defense. This has profound and lifelong consequences. One of the most significant is the impact on self-regulation. A child like Leo never had a caregiver who consistently helped him calm down when he was upset. No one soothed his cries, so he never learned how to soothe himself. As an adult, minor frustrations could feel like overwhelming crises. He either shut down completely or reacted with a flash of anger that was way out of proportion. He was like a car with a faulty brake and a hypersensitive accelerator. Another consequence is a fragmented sense of self. When your inner world is consistently ignored or rejected, you stop trusting it. You don't know what you feel, because your feelings were never important to anyone else. You might feel empty inside, or you might construct a false self, the person you think you were supposed to be to earn love and approval. This is why so many survivors of developmental trauma feel like they're faking it, like they're waiting to be discovered as a fraud. And this leads to the relational patterns we've discussed. The blueprint for relationship is one of fear, uncertainty, and a deep-seated belief that they are fundamentally unlovable. They may crave intimacy, but find it terrifying. They may become clingy and anxious or distant and avoidant. Their relationships become a stage where they reenact the old drama of their childhood, desperately trying to get the love and safety they never received, but using strategies that are doomed to fail. For a long time, the mental health field didn't have a clear way to diagnose this. We would see the symptoms, the anxiety, the depression, the explosive anger, the difficulty in relationships, and we would give them separate labels: ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar disorder. We were treating the smoke without understanding there was a fire slowly burning for years. This is why the concept of developmental trauma disorder is so crucial. It's an attempt to name the root, not just the branches. It recognizes that when a child develops in a chronically unsafe environment, the entire system is affected. It's not a collection of separate problems. It is a fundamental disorganization of the self. But here is where we find our hope. The same neuroplasticity that allowed the brain to wire itself for survival in a hostile environment can allow it to rewire for healing in a safe one. The brain remains capable of change throughout our lives. Healing from developmental trauma is a process of building that foundation, brick by brick, often for the first time. It's about finding relationships that provide the consistent attunement and safety that was missing. It's about learning, as an adult, the skills of self-regulation that should have been learned in childhood. How to calm a racing heart. How to tolerate difficult emotions without dissociating or exploding. It involves gently revisiting the body, helping it to release the chronic tension and defensive bracing it has held for decades. It's about helping the person discover who they are beneath the false self, to connect with their own authentic wants, needs, and feelings. This work is slow. It is deep. It's not about quick fixes. It's about reparenting the wounded parts of the self within the context of safe, healing relationships. It is the courageous journey of moving from surviving to truly living, of building a solid home within yourself when your early world provided none. This hidden epidemic can be addressed not by forgetting the past, but by finally giving the self the nurturing and safety it has always deserved. We have journeyed through the brain, the body, and the developing mind of the child. We've seen how trauma reshapes our biology and our blueprints for connection. But now we arrive at a central mystery. How does the past, especially a past we may not clearly remember, hold such power over our present? This is about the imprint of trauma. This is about how our minds and bodies record, store, and relentlessly replay the moments that overwhelmed us. To understand this, we have to understand that memory is not a single thing. It's not a perfect video recording of the past. There are different kinds of memory, and trauma disrupts this system in a very specific and devastating way. Let me explain with a normal memory. Think about your last birthday or a recent vacation. When you recall it, you're probably aware that you are remembering something from the past. You can tell a story about it. We went to the beach. It was sunny. We had a great time. This is what we call explicit or narrative memory. It's a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's filed away in the filing cabinet of your mind, and you can take it out, look at it, and put it back. But traumatic memory is nothing like that. It's not a story you tell. It's an experience you relive. When something overwhelmingly frightening happens, the brain's alarm system, the amygdala, screams so loudly that it can knock the higher brain functions offline. The thalamus, which is like the brain's cook, the part that blends our senses into a coherent soup of experience, can stop working properly. Sights, sounds, smells, and physical sensations don't get blended into a story. They remain as raw, unprocessed, isolated fragments. So, a traumatic memory isn't stored as that terrible thing that happened to me back then. It's stored as a blinding flash of light, the smell of smoke, the sensation of cold metal, the sound of a scream, and a crushing feeling of terror in your chest. These fragments are not filed away in the past. They are, in a very real sense, timeless. This is why a trigger, a sound, a smell, a tone of voice can cause someone to be instantly hurled back into the past. It's not a memory of fear. It is the fear itself, happening right now. The rational, time-keeping part of the brain is offline, so there is no then and now. There is only the terrifying present of the past. I remember working with a woman, Anna, who had been in a severe car accident. Years later, she was driving on a sunny, clear day. A car in the next lane suddenly hit its brakes hard, and the sun glinted off its bumper in a particular way. In that instant, Anna wasn't on the road anymore. She was back in her wrecked car. She could smell the gasoline, feel the steering wheel jammed against her ribs, and hear the echo of the crushing metal. She slammed on her brakes and began sobbing uncontrollably, much to the confusion of the other drivers. Her rational mind knew the accident was long over, but her body was convinced it was happening all over again. A sensory fragment, the glint of light, had unlocked the entire unprocessed sensory experience. This explains the two seemingly opposite ways people often speak about trauma. Some people say they remember everything in excruciating, vivid detail. Others say they can't remember anything at all. Both are true. They may have no narrative memory of the event, no story to tell, but their bodies remember everything in perfect sensory detail. The memory is held in the gut, in the tense shoulders, in the pounding heart. This is also the root of the terrible conflict around traumatic memory. How can something be so real, so visceral, and yet so difficult to articulate? This is why survivors often doubt themselves. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I'm making it up. But the body doesn't lie. The body keeps a precise sensory record. The problem is, it's a record without a timestamp or a narrator. This imprint has a powerful effect on our identity. When a traumatic experience remains frozen and unintegrated, it can become a black hole in your personal history, pulling all your energy toward it. Your sense of self can become organized around the trauma. You are not a person who had a terrible thing happen. You are a damaged, broken, or terrified person. The trauma becomes the central defining story of your life, not because you want it to, but because it has never been metabolized and moved into the past. This is what we see in the groundbreaking ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. It revealed a stunning, direct correlation between the number of stressful or traumatic experiences in childhood and the likelihood of adult health problems, from heart disease and diabetes to depression and substance use. The score was being kept silently in the body. The imprints of early adversity were writing a script for future illness and struggle. But understanding the nature of this imprint is the first step toward changing it. If trauma is stored as disconnected sensory fragments in the body, then healing must involve finding a way to access those fragments and help the brain process them into a story that can be filed away in the past. It requires creating enough safety in the present so that the brain can begin to do the work it couldn't do during the event itself. To sort the sensations, to assign them a context, to weave them into the timeline of a life. It's about turning the haunting, sensory ghosts of the past into simple memories. This is not about digging for details. It is about gently befriending the sensations and emotions that arise and, in the safety of the present moment, allowing them to complete their journey. It is the process of teaching the body that the event is over, while helping the mind make sense of what happened. It is the delicate, profound work of transforming the imprint from a curse that controls you into a story that you own. And that transformation is at the very heart of recovery. If the past is a foreign country, then traumatic memory is a smuggled artifact from that land. It's not a postcard you chose to send yourself. It's something that arrives, uninvited and often unrecognizable, carrying the emotional weight of a place you thought you had left behind. This is the complex and often misunderstood problem of traumatic memory. We tend to think of memory as a library, a place where we can go to retrieve stories from the past. But traumatic memory doesn't live in the library. It lives in the basement, in the wiring and the plumbing. It is a glitch in the system that causes the lights to flicker and the alarms to sound at random times. Let me tell you about a man named Mark. Mark came to see me because he was having trouble in his marriage. He described himself as having a short fuse. His wife would make a simple request, and he would feel a surge of rage that seemed to come from nowhere. He'd yell, slam a door, and then feel deeply ashamed. He couldn't understand his own reactions. One day, he was telling me about a project at work that was falling behind. He was feeling pressured and criticized. As he spoke, his posture changed. He slumped in his chair and his eyes lost focus. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was somewhere else. His voice became small, almost childlike. He whispered, "I can't do anything right. I'm just stupid." I asked him gently, "Does that feeling have an age?" He was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "It's 9. I'm 9 years old and my father is standing over me, yelling because I got a B on my math test. He's throwing my paper on the floor. He's telling me I'll never amount to anything." Mark wasn't remembering this scene from his childhood. He was reliving it. The feeling of being a failure, the shame, the terror. It was all happening in the present. The criticism from his boss had triggered a memory fragment. The emotional state of being a shamed little boy, and his body and mind responded as if his father were in the room with us. His rage at his wife was a defensive reaction, a fight response meant to protect that helpless 9-year-old from a criticism that felt life-threatening. This is the central problem of traumatic memory. It's not a narrative, it's a reenactment. When a terrifying event occurs, the brain has a difficult choice. The experience is too overwhelming to be processed through the normal channels. So it gets broken down. The facts of the event might be stored in one place. The emotions, the sheer terror, are stored in another. The physical sensations, a tight chest, a knot in the stomach, are stored somewhere else. And the meaning, "I am helpless, I am bad," becomes a deeply held belief, separate from the story itself. This is why someone can know the facts of what happened to them, but feel numb and disconnected from them. The story is there, but the feelings are walled off. Or conversely, they can be flooded with feelings of terror and shame, but have no clear story to attach them to. The pieces of the experience are dissociated, fragmented, like a mirror shattered on the floor. This explains the great paradox that survivors often face. They can be accused of two contradictory things, of making it up because the story is hazy or changes, and of being obsessed with the past because the feelings are so intense and persistent. Both criticisms miss the point entirely. The memory is not a story to be told with perfect accuracy. It is a collection of sensory and emotional fragments that intrude upon the present. The goal of therapy, then, is not to uncover a perfect video-like recording of the past. That is a futile and often harmful quest. The goal is integration. It is to help the different fragments of the memory, the story, the sensation, the emotion, and the meaning, find each other again and form a coherent whole. It's about helping Mark, in a state of safety, to feel the anger and sadness of that 9-year-old boy, to tell the story of what happened, and to understand the meaning he made from it. I am a failure. And to gently challenge that conclusion with the wisdom of his adult self. This process doesn't erase the memory, it detoxifies it. It moves it from the reactive basement of the brain, where it controls you, up to the library of the mind, where you can hold it. It becomes a memory you have, rather than a memory that has you. It transforms the memory from a screaming alarm into a story. A story that is, without a doubt, painful. A story of something that should never have happened. But a story that is now firmly in the past. And when the past is finally allowed to be past, the present suddenly opens up, filled with new possibilities that were once unimaginable. There is a weight to some memories. It's not a metaphorical weight. It's a physical sensation, a density in the chest, a leaden feeling in the limbs, a gravity that seems to pull you backward into the past. This is the unbearable heaviness of remembering. It's the feeling of carrying something that your mind and body are desperately trying to both hold on to and set down at the very same time. We often tell people and ourselves to just let things go. But what if the thing you need to let go of isn't a thought? What if it's a physical imprint, a full-body memory that has taken up residence inside you? You can't simply decide to put it down. It has become a part of your biological structure. I want you to think about a woman I'll call Lena. Lena experienced a traumatic event in her early 20s. For years, she thought she was fine. She had a good career, she was sociable, she was, as she put it, over it. But her body told a different story. She had chronic tension in her shoulders and neck that no amount of massage could release. She was a light sleeper, startling awake at the smallest sound. And she had a recurring sensation, especially when she was tired or stressed, of a heavy, cold stone sitting in the pit of her stomach. She didn't connect this to her past. She thought it was just how she was built. A little anxious, a little tense, but that heavy, cold stone was a memory. It was the physical echo of the moment her life was in danger, the visceral sensation of terror and helplessness that her body had never been able to discharge. She was carrying the weight of that moment every single day. This is the core of the unbearable heaviness. Traumatic memories are not just psychological, they are physiological. They are stored in the body as unfinished business. The massive energy that was mobilized for survival, the adrenaline, the tension, the urge to fight or flee never actually got used. It got trapped, and the body, in its infinite wisdom and loyalty, continues to hold on to that energy, just in case it's needed again. It's like carrying a full, heavy bucket with you everywhere you go, never allowed to set it down. This explains why simply talking about a traumatic memory can often feel so re-traumatizing. When Lena would try to discuss the event, she wouldn't just be telling a story. Her body would begin to react. Her heart would race. Her breath would become shallow. That cold stone in her stomach would feel even heavier. She was not recounting the past. She was re-embodying it. The act of remembering was in itself a physically draining and painful experience. Her body was reliving the event, not just her mind. And this creates a terrible conflict. A part of you knows you need to process what happened, but another part of you, a deeper survival-based part, knows that remembering feels like a threat to your stability. It feels like picking up a live wire. So, you learn to avoid. You might avoid conversations, places, people, or even certain feelings that could trigger that heavy, overwhelming sensation. You build a life around not remembering. The problem is, the energy of that trapped memory doesn't disappear. It leaks. It comes out as chronic pain, as autoimmune issues, as a constant state of irritation, as a profound exhaustion that sleep never cures. The body continues to spend a massive amount of resources maintaining a state of defense against an internal ghost. It is an exhausting, lonely, and heavy way to live. So, how do we lift this weight? The answer is not to try and forget, nor is it to tear the memory out by its roots in a painful, dramatic confrontation. Healing lies in a different approach altogether. It's about helping the body complete the cycle that was interrupted. It's about finding a way to release the trapped survival energy in a safe and manageable way. For Lena, this didn't start with talking about the event. It started with her body. In a safe therapeutic setting, we began to gently explore the sensation of that cold stone in her stomach. We got curious about it. What was its texture? Its temperature? Did it have a size or a shape? This wasn't about analyzing it, but about simply acknowledging its presence without judgment. Then we began to introduce small, gentle movements. We worked with her breath, focusing on long, slow exhales to signal safety to her nervous system. We experimented with very simple, empowering physical actions, pushing against a pillow with her hands, stomping her feet firmly on the ground. These were not dramatic acts. They were small, controlled movements that allowed her body to physically experience what it could not do during the traumatic event. To push away a threat, to stand her ground, to mobilize her energy with a sense of agency. Slowly, over time, the heavy, cold sensation in her stomach began to change. It didn't vanish overnight, but it became less dense. It felt warmer. It shifted. She described it one day as finally beginning to dissolve. The memory was not erased, but the physical weight of it was being released. Her body was finally learning that the event was over and it could stand down from its constant state of alert. The unbearable heaviness of remembering begins to lift when we stop fighting the memory and start listening to the body that holds it. It's a process of gentle titration, of slowly and safely releasing the pressure that has built up over years. It is the journey from carrying the past as a crushing burden to holding it as a story that, while painful, no longer has the power to define your physical existence in the present. It is the profound relief of finally being able to set the bucket down. After this long journey through the anatomy of trauma, through the brain, the body, the mind of the child, and the haunting imprint of memory, we now arrive at the most important question of all. So what do we do? How do we find our way back? This is where we explore the paths to recovery. For too long, we've been told that healing is about changing our thoughts, that if we just think more positively or understand the past more clearly, we can overcome it. But as we've seen, trauma is not stored in the thinking part of the brain as a neat set of facts. It's stored in the survival brain, in the body, as a set of sensations, reactions, and deeply held beliefs. You cannot think your way out of a reaction that was wired into your circuitry for a reason. Healing, therefore, must be an experiential process. It is about having new experiences that are powerful enough to penetrate into those deeper layers of the self and deliver a new message of safety, agency, and connection. The first and most fundamental path is the path of safety. You cannot do any of the work of healing if your nervous system is constantly screaming that you are in danger. The very first step is always about establishing an internal sense of safety. This is not a cognitive decision. It's a biological state. This is where practices like mindfulness and yoga are not just lifestyle choices. They are neurobiological interventions. When you learn to focus on your breath, you are doing something remarkable. You are taking a function that is usually automatic and bringing it under conscious control. A long, slow exhale is a direct signal to the vagus nerve, the main nerve of your relaxation system, telling it to press the brake. It's a message sent from your body to your brain that says, in this moment, we are safe. This is bottom-up regulation. You are calming the engine of the body so that the mind can eventually calm down too. The second path is the path of agency. Trauma is the ultimate experience of helplessness. Recovery, then, must be the experience of reclaiming your power. This isn't about power over others. It's about the power to affect your own internal state and your environment. This can look like many things. For one person, it might be learning a martial art, where they can physically feel their own strength and learn to set boundaries in a controlled, safe environment. For another, it might be something as simple as learning to rock themselves to sleep when they feel anxious, providing for themselves the soothing rhythm they never received as a child. It is about completing the defensive responses that were truncated during the trauma, to finally push away what needs to be pushed away, to run when you need to run, to say no with the full conviction of your body and voice. The third path is the path of integration. This is where we help the fragmented pieces of the trauma, the isolated images, sounds, and sensations become a coherent story. But we have to be very careful here. Forcing the story before the body feels safe can simply lead to re-traumatization. This is where approaches like EMDR or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing can be so helpful. It doesn't require you to talk about the trauma in great detail. Instead, it uses bilateral stimulation, like moving your eyes back and forth while you gently hold the memory in mind. It acts as if the rhythmic left-right stimulation helps to unlock the frozen memory file and allows the brain to process it naturally. moving it from a raw, sensory experience to something that feels like it belongs in the past. The memory loses its emotional charge. It becomes a story you have, rather than a reality you are living. The fourth path is the path of connection. We are fundamentally social creatures. Our nervous systems are designed to co-regulate, to calm each other, to soothe each other. Trauma shatters this capacity. It makes you feel like an alien among other people. Healing this requires finding ways to safely reconnect. This might be in a therapy group where you discover you are not alone. It might be in a choir where you feel the rhythm of your breath and voice synchronize with others. It might be in a yoga class, moving in unison with a room full of people. It might be through a trusting, patient relationship with a therapist or a partner. These experiences of safe, rhythmic connection directly stimulate the social engagement system in the brain. They teach your body at a visceral level that it is safe to be close to others. Finally, there is the path of rewiring. We now have technologies like neurofeedback, which allows you to see your own brainwave patterns in real time. It's like giving the brain a mirror. Through this feedback, you can learn, quite literally, to shift your brain's own activity out of states of hyper-alertness or shutdown and into states of calm focus. It's a powerful way to teach self-regulation directly to the brain itself. All of these paths share a common thread. They bypass the thinking, talking brain and speak directly to the feeling, sensing, surviving self. They are about giving the body new experiences that directly contradict the helplessness, terror, and disconnection of trauma. Recovery is not about going back to who you were before the trauma. That person is gone. It is about moving forward, integrating the experience into the fabric of your life and becoming someone new. Someone who has faced the darkness and discovered a resilience they never knew they had. Someone who knows the weight of the past but is no longer crushed by it. It is a journey from being a victim of your history to being the author of your present. And every step on that path, no matter how small, is a triumph of the human spirit. This is the promise of recovery. Not a life without scars, but a life where your scars become a part of your strength, and where you can finally feel fully, vibrantly, and safely alive. All the paths to recovery, all the techniques and therapies, they all converge on a single fundamental destination. A place you must come to own, not just visit. That destination is yourself. Healing from trauma is, at its core, the process of owning yourself again, of becoming the legitimate president of your own body and your own life. For so long, if you have lived with trauma, you may have felt like a tenant in your own body, or worse, a prisoner. The alarms go off without your permission. The lights flicker. The defenses slam shut, based on old protocols written during a war you didn't choose. The goal of healing is not to silence these systems, but to reclaim your authority over them, to move from being a hostage to your own survival responses, to becoming their wise and compassionate leader. This begins with a seemingly simple yet profoundly difficult task: to turn toward your inner experience with curiosity instead of fear. Think of it like this. For years, maybe decades, a feeling of panic in your chest wasn't a feeling to be explored. It was a 5-alarm fire. A sensation of numbness wasn't a sensation. It was a void to be feared or filled with any distraction possible. Your inner world was a place of danger, so you learned to live on the surface, in the world of action and distraction, because going inside felt like stepping into a haunted house. Owning yourself starts when you decide to walk into that house, not with a weapon, but with a flashlight and a compassionate guide. You learn to say, there is that tightness in my chest again. Let me just be with it for a moment and see what it needs. This is a radical act. You are no longer running from the sensation. You are relating to it. You are beginning to befriend your own interior. This is what we mean by mindfulness. It's not about emptying your mind. It's about filling your awareness with a kind, non-judgmental attention to what is already there. It is the practice of becoming the observer of your own experience, rather than being lost inside it. When you can observe your panic and say, "I am noticing the sensation of panic," you have just created a critical sliver of space. In that space, your conscious present-day self has just shown up. You are no longer fused with the trauma, you are the one witnessing it. And this is how you start to reassemble the fragments of yourself. Trauma is a force of disintegration. It splits you off from your body, your emotions, your memories. Ownership is a process of integration. I think of it as gathering your internal committee. There's the furious part that wants to scream. There's the terrified part that wants to hide. There's the numb part that just wants to disappear. In a traumatized system, these parts are often at war. The furious part is angry at the numb part for checking out. The numb part is terrified of the furious part's rage. Healing happens when you, as the conscious adult self, can sit at the head of the table and listen to each of these parts. You don't try to fire them, you don't try to silence them, you thank them for their service, you listen to the furious part and understand that its job was to protect you with anger when no one else would. You listen to the numb part and understand that its job was to help you survive the unbearable by helping you disappear. When these exiled parts feel heard and understood by you, they no longer need to scream so loudly for attention. They can relax. They can hand their old jobs back over to you, the competent adult in the present. You integrate them. You own them. They become parts of your history, not the directors of your present. This ownership then extends into your life. It's about making choices that are aligned with your true self, not with your traumatic past. It's the moment you choose to leave a party early because you feel overwhelmed, honoring your need for quiet instead of pushing through to please others. It's the moment you decide to end a relationship that feels familiar but is ultimately harmful. Because you now trust your gut feeling that you deserve better. It's the moment you sign up for a class you've always been curious about because you are investing in your own joy and curiosity. This is you writing the resume of your own life. You are no longer reacting to old threats. You are responding to present moment opportunities based on who you are and what you want. Owning yourself is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice. It is the continued commitment to show up for yourself, to listen to your body's whispers, to feel your feelings without being consumed by them, and to make choices from a place of self-respect. It is the journey from feeling like a ghost in your own life to feeling like the solid, undeniable, and authoritative presence at the very center of it. It is the profound and quiet revolution of coming home to yourself and finally, truly, taking ownership of the keys. We arrive now at a profound paradox, at one of the most delicate and powerful tools we have, our words. Language is both a miracle and a tyranny. It can be the bridge that connects our inner world to others, and it can be the very wall that keeps us imprisoned inside ourselves. Think about what a miracle it is. A baby feels a gnawing sensation in its belly. It feels a rising distress, and it cries. A mother hears that cry and translates it. She says, "You're hungry." She gives the sensation a name. Over time, the child learns the word. That internal wordless discomfort becomes hunger. And with that word, the child can now ask for what it needs. This is the miracle of language. It takes our raw, internal, private experience and makes it social. It allows us to be understood. This is the foundation of talk therapy, the talking cure, the belief that if we can just find the right words to tell our story, we can heal. And for many kinds of pain, this is profoundly true. Giving voice to a heartbreak, to a disappointment, to a fear, can loosen its grip. We feel seen and heard, the story becomes shared, and the burden becomes lighter. But trauma exists in a different realm, As we've seen, trauma happens in the pre-verbal sensory world of the brain. It happens in the flash of an image, the roar of a sound, the freeze in the muscles, the smell of smoke. When the trauma occurred, the speech center of the brain, Broca's area, likely went offline. The experience was not encoded as a story, it was encoded as a collection of sensory fragments. So when a trauma survivor tries to speak about what happened, they often hit a wall. The words aren't there, or the words feel hollow, inadequate, a pathetic translation of an unspeakable reality. They stutter, they go blank, they say, "I can't describe it." This is not resistance, this is a biological reality. They are trying to access a non-verbal sensory memory with a verbal tool. It's like trying to describe the color red to someone who has been blind since birth. The words simply cannot capture the experience. This is the tyranny of language. The pressure to just talk about it can become a source of shame and failure. When the words fail to come, the person can feel even more isolated, even more broken. They think, if I could just explain it, then people would understand. Since I can't, I must be crazy. The very tool that is supposed to connect them becomes a measure of their disconnection. I have sat with many people who have told me their trauma story with a flat, emotionless voice. They could recite the facts, the timeline, the events, but the story was sterile. It was a report. It had no life. And then, a moment later, a scent from the hallway would trigger them, and they would be plunged into a panic attack, sweating and trembling. The story was disconnected from the sensory and emotional reality of the memory. The words were a cage, not a bridge. So if language is both a miracle and a tyranny, how do we work with it in healing? The key is to understand that language is not the starting point, it is the destination. Healing begins not with words, but with the body. It begins by helping a person to first notice and tolerate the physical sensations that are associated with the trauma. The tightness in the chest, the churning in the stomach, the tension in the shoulders. We have to go back to the pre-verbal language of the body before we can find the words. We help them create a bridge between the sensation and the word. We might ask, if that tightness in your chest could make a sound, what would it be? Or, if that feeling in your stomach had a color, what would it be? This bypasses the logical narrative brain and taps into the symbolic sensory brain. It's a different kind of language. As the person learns to safely feel the sensations in their body, and as the fragments of the memory begin to integrate, something remarkable can happen. The words often begin to emerge on their own. Not forced, not contrived, but arising naturally from a place of integration. A person might say, "It feels like a weight is lifting," or "I feel a warmth spreading in my chest," or "the image is becoming less sharp." These are the true words of healing. They are not describing the trauma itself, but the process of the body unlocking and releasing it. And eventually, the story can follow. But it will be a different story. It will be a story that is connected to the feeling. It will be a story that the person owns, rather than a story that owns them. The words will have blood and breath in them. They will carry the truth of the experience, not just the facts. Language becomes a miracle again when it is used to describe the journey of the self, not just the facts of the event. It becomes a tool for crafting a new narrative, one of survival, of strength, of reclaiming one's life. The tyranny is broken when we stop forcing the words to do a job they cannot do, and we allow them to emerge naturally as a testament to the healing that is already, quietly, taking place within. How do you let go of a past that is not yet past? How do you release a story that is held not just in your mind, but in the very chemistry of your body? This is one of the most puzzling questions in healing, and it led to the discovery of a fascinating tool that has helped millions. It's called EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. But to understand it, we have to first understand why some memories won't let go of us. Think of your mind as having a natural healing process, much like your body. If you get a cut, your body has an innate intelligence to clean the wound, create a scab, and heal it. Your mind has a similar system for processing everyday upsets. You have an argument with a friend, you feel upset, you talk it out, you sleep on it, and the next day it feels less raw. The memory files itself away as something that happened, but it no longer carries a strong emotional charge. But traumatic memories are different. They are like a wound that never closes. They get infected. The memory, with all its raw images, sounds, and emotions, gets stuck in the nervous system. It's isolated from the rest of your life experiences. It's a frozen piece of time, untouched by the healing flow of your mind's own natural process. So the question becomes, how can we jumpstart this stalled process? How can we help the brain do what it was meant to do? This is where EMDR comes in. I want to tell you about a patient I'll call Sarah. Sarah was in a minor fender bender, but for months afterward, she couldn't drive without feeling a surge of panic. The image of the other car hitting hers would flash in her mind, and her heart would instantly race. She knew she was safe, but her body didn't. In an EMDR session, we didn't spend a long time talking about the accident. Instead, I asked her to just bring up the worst part of the memory, that image of the moment of impact, and to notice the feeling in her body. Then I asked her to follow my fingers with her eyes as I moved them back and forth in front of her. This part can sound strange. Why would moving your eyes back and forth make a difference? The theory is that this bilateral stimulation, this left-right rhythm, mimics the natural processing that happens during REM sleep, the dream stage of sleep, when our eyes dart back and forth. It's as if we are kickstarting the brain's own internal healing mechanism, unlocking the frozen memory and allowing the brain to finally metabolize it. As Sarah followed the eye movements, she would report what was coming up. It wasn't a linear story. At first, she felt the terror in her chest. Then she had an image of her children who were in the back seat. Then she felt a wave of anger at the other driver. Then a memory of feeling helpless as a child flashed through her mind. This is the reprocessing part. The brain begins to make connections it couldn't make before. It links the frozen memory with other, more adaptive information. The memory starts to integrate into the larger narrative of her life. After several sets of eye movements, something shifted. She described the memory again. "It feels farther away," she said. "It's like it's a movie I'm watching, not something I'm inside of." The image had lost its vivid, terrifying quality. The tightness in her chest was gone. When she thought about driving, she no longer felt panic. She felt cautious, but competent. The memory was now a memory. It was in the past. This is the goal of EMDR. It doesn't erase the memory. You don't forget what happened. Instead, the memory is desensitized. The emotional charge is drained from it. It is reprocessed and filed away properly in the brain as something that happened then, not something that is happening now. The past, finally, becomes past. It's as if the bilateral stimulation helps the brain sift through the fragmented pieces of the experience, discarding the toxic emotional waste and weaving what's useful into the fabric of your life story. The event becomes a part of your history, but it ceases to be a dictator of your present. This is what it means to let go. It's not an act of will. It is a biological process of completion. It is the profound relief of the body and mind finally, in unison, recognizing that the danger has passed and that you are safe to live fully in the here and now. You know, I was talking with someone the other day, and they said something that stuck with me. They said, "I feel like I'm renting a body. I'm just living in it for a while. It doesn't really feel like it's mine." And that feeling, that profound sense of disconnection, is one of the most painful and common legacies of trauma. It's not just a thought in your head. It's a lived experience in your joints, your muscles, your breath. It is as if the very place you are meant to feel most at home, your own skin, has become a place of unease or even danger. This is the territory we're exploring today. It's a journey from being a tenant in your own body to becoming the owner. The book, The Body Keeps the Score, offers us a powerful map for this journey, and in this particular chapter, we look at one of the most profound pathways home, the practice of yoga. Now, when I say yoga, I'm not talking about the pictures you see on social media of impossible-looking poses. This isn't about flexibility or fitness, not in the way we usually think of it. This is about a much deeper, more ancient form of yoga. It's a form of learning, or perhaps relearning, how to inhabit yourself. Let me tell you a story about a woman I'll call Sarah. Sarah came into her life feeling constantly on alert. Her shoulders were always up by her ears, her jaw was permanently clenched, loud noises would make her heart race for hours. She was brilliant at explaining her past, at understanding what had happened to her intellectually. She could talk for an hour about her childhood, the dynamics, the pain, but it was as if her mind and her body were living in two separate universes. Her mind had the story, but her body was still living in the emergency. She said to me once, "I know I'm safe now, in this room with you, but my body doesn't believe it. My body is still back there, bracing for the next blow." That's the split. That's the divide that trauma creates. This is the first and perhaps most crucial insight that this work reveals. Trauma is not just a story about the past that we remember. It is an experience that is lodged in our present tense physiology. Your body is, in a very real sense, keeping score. Every tense muscle, every held breath, every skipped heartbeat is a page in that ledger. The alarm system that once helped you survive a genuine threat has gotten stuck in the on position, and because the danger is now internal, you can't run from it, you can't hide. You're trapped in a body that feels like a battlefield. So, the first step isn't to change the body, not yet. It's to simply notice it, to bring a gentle, curious awareness to the very sensations we've spent a lifetime trying to escape. This is where the practice begins. It starts not with a pose, but with a question. Can you feel the weight of your body on the chair right now? Can you notice where your feet meet the floor? Can you track the simple, life-giving rhythm of your breath as it enters and leaves your body? For someone like Sarah, even this was terrifying. To feel her body was to feel the anxiety, the tension, the panic. It felt like opening a door to a room she knew was full of monsters. The genius of this therapeutic approach to yoga is that it doesn't ask you to throw that door wide open. It invites you to simply sit with the closed door for a while, to notice the wood grain, the coolness of the doorknob. It's about building what we call your capacity for interoception, your ability to feel the internal landscape of your body. And this leads us to the second key insight. The goal is not to achieve a state of perfect calm or bliss. The goal is to develop a friendly relationship with whatever is there, even if what's there is discomfort. Think about a good friendship. A good friend doesn't only want to be with you when you're happy and cheerful. A good friend can sit with you in your sadness, your anger, your fear, without trying to immediately fix it or run away. They offer a quiet, steady presence. This is the relationship we are trying to build with our own bodies. Can you be a friend to the tightness in your shoulders? Can you offer a kind attention to the churning in your stomach? Sarah's first yoga session was a revelation in this. The instructor didn't push her into any difficult poses. She simply guided her to notice the sensation of her hands on her thighs, then to gently tilt her head to one side just a few degrees, and to notice what she felt. Was there a pulling, a stretching, a tingling? There was no right or wrong answer. There was only the practice of noticing. And for the first time, Sarah wasn't being asked to change a sensation. She was just being asked to witness it. And in that witnessing, something subtle shifted. The sensation was no longer just bad tension. It became a specific, nuanced feeling in a specific part of her neck. And by naming it, by feeling its edges and textures, she, for a fleeting moment, was in relationship with it, rather than being overwhelmed by it. This practice of mindful, gentle movement is where we begin to rewrite the old score. Every time you move and breathe with awareness, you are sending a new message to your deep survival brain. You are saying, in this moment, as I move my arm, there is no threat. In this moment, as I feel this stretch, I am safe. In this moment, as I exhale slowly, I am the one in charge. You are not fighting the old alarm system. You are not arguing with it. You are patiently, consistently teaching it a new reality through direct experience. You are building a new kind of memory, a somatic memory of safety and agency. Agency. That's the third profound insight here. Trauma robs you of your sense of agency. It makes you feel like things are being done to you, that you have no choice, no control. The body becomes a place where things happen, not a place from which you act. This therapeutic yoga practice is a gentle, systematic way of reclaiming that agency. It's a laboratory for choice. Do I want to move my arm a little further today, or do I want to back off? Do I want to stay in this shape for another breath? The practice is filled with these tiny moment-to-moment decisions. I remember Sarah describing a breakthrough moment for her. She was in a class, in a very simple kneeling pose. The instructor offered an option to gently arch the back and then to gently round it. As Sarah moved, she felt a sharp, familiar pain in her lower back. The old response would have been to push through it, to grit her teeth and endure, or to completely collapse and give up. Both were trauma responses, either fight, flight, or collapse. But this time, she paused. She listened. And she made a choice. She chose to move just an inch less, to find a version of the movement where the pain wasn't present, where there was just sensation. In that simple physical choice, she wasn't a victim of her body's pain. She was the active author of her experience. She had agency. She had a say. And that, she told me later, was more powerful than any insight she'd ever had in talk therapy. She had felt her power return, not just thought about it. This is how we begin to stitch the self back together. We build a bridge of felt experience between the mind that knows and the body that feels. We start to translate the body's language of sensation into a new, empowering narrative. The tightness in the chest is no longer just anxiety. It becomes a feeling of tightness that comes and goes and that I can breathe into. The trembling in the hands is no longer just weakness. It becomes a release of long-held energy. We become the compassionate interpreter of our body's signals rather than its terrified victim. The journey of inhabiting your body is not a linear one. It's a spiral. You will revisit the same places, the same tight shoulders, the same shallow breath. But each time, you will come to them with a little more awareness, a little more friendship, a little more choice. You are not trying to create a perfect pain-free body. You are cultivating a relationship. And like any good relationship, it's built on thousands of small, consistent moments of attention and respect. So, if you feel that disconnect, if you feel like a tenant in your own skin, I want you to know that the path home exists. It is a path of gentle curiosity, not forceful change. It begins with a single breath, noticed, a single sensation, acknowledged, a single movement, chosen. It begins with the courageous decision to stop running from the one place you can never leave, and to instead turn around and slowly, kindly learn to come home. When we last spoke, we talked about the journey of coming home to your body, of moving from being a tenant to becoming the owner. It's a vital, foundational step. But what happens when you get inside the house and you find it's not a single peaceful space? What if it feels more like a building with many rooms, and in each room a different version of you is living, each with their own fears, their own jobs, their own ideas about how to keep everything safe? One part is fiercely angry, another is a terrified child, another is a relentless critic, and another just wants to disappear. If you've ever felt this internal civil war, this sense of being pulled in a dozen different directions, then you already understand the landscape we're about to explore. This is about the next courageous phase of healing, moving from internal conflict to what we call self-leadership. I want you to think of a time you felt a really difficult emotion, like a surge of anger. Maybe someone cut you off in traffic. For a split second, a white-hot rage floods your system, but almost immediately, another voice chimes in. It says, "You shouldn't feel that way, that's an overreaction. What's wrong with you?" So now, you're not just feeling anger, you're feeling anger and then shame for feeling angry. You have one part of you that is furious and another part of you that is condemning the fury. This is the internal fragmentation that trauma leaves in its wake. It's not that you are broken, it's that your internal system, which was meant to be a collaborative team, has become a group of individuals who don't trust each other, who are often at war. This is the first and perhaps most liberating insight of this work. We are not a single monolithic self. We are a constellation of parts. Think of it as an internal family. You have a part that is a protector, maybe one that uses anger to set boundaries. You have a part that is a vulnerable child who holds the original pain. You have a manager part that tries to control everything to prevent disaster. These aren't multiple personalities. They are natural facets of a whole human psyche. In a well-functioning system, these parts work together under the leadership of a core-centered self. But trauma shatters that leadership. The self goes into exile, and the protective parts, the firefighters and the managers, take over, working in extreme and often exhausting ways to keep the vulnerable parts safe. Let me tell you about Michael. Michael was a man who, on the surface, had it all together. He was successful in his career, a provider for his family, but inside, he was drowning. He would have periods of intense, driven workaholism, where he was all business, no emotion. Then something small would happen, a missed deadline, a critical comment from his wife, and he would collapse into a state of profound hopelessness, feeling like a complete failure. He'd then get angry at himself for feeling hopeless, and he'd force himself back into workaholism. It was a brutal, endless cycle. He'd say, "I don't get it. One minute I'm on top of the world, capable of anything. The next, I'm a worthless kid hiding under the blankets. Which one is the real me?" The answer, of course, is that they both were. He had a manager part that was a relentless driver, and an exiled part that was a despairing child, and they were locked in a battle for control. This leads us to the second key insight. Healing does not come from getting rid of these parts. It doesn't come from defeating the angry part or silencing the critical part. In fact, that very effort is just another part trying to take control. The path to integration is curiosity, not conquest. The goal is to approach these exiled and protective parts not as enemies, but as lost, burdened members of your own internal family who took on extreme roles for a very good reason, to help you survive. Your angry protector isn't bad. It's a loyal soldier who learned that fury was the only way to keep the world at bay. Your hopeless part isn't weak. It's a heartbroken child who finally gave up because the pain was too much. The work of self-leadership begins when we learn to access what we call the self. The self is not another part. It's you at your core. It's the you that possesses the innate qualities of compassion, curiosity, calm, clarity, and courage. You've experienced this self, even if only in glimpses. It's the you that shows up when a friend is in crisis, and you know just what to say. It's the you that suddenly feels clear and focused in a moment of genuine play, like when you're lost in a hobby or laughing with a child. That is the essence of self. And it is from this place that we can begin to approach our internal family. With Michael, we began not by trying to change the cycle, but by simply observing it with curiosity. The next time he felt that surge of workaholic energy, I asked him to just pause for a moment, not to stop it, but to thank it, to actually say internally, "Thank you for trying to protect me. I see how hard you're working to make me feel competent and safe." This was a complete revolution for him. He was used to either obeying this drive or fighting it. He had never simply listened to it. When he did, he discovered that this driver part was terrified. It truly believed that if it stopped for 1 second, everything would fall apart, and the feeling of utter worthlessness would consume him. It wasn't a monster, it was a protector. A tired, overworked, but deeply loyal protector. This is the third profound shift. When we befriend our protectors, they often begin to soften. They have been carrying an immense burden, standing guard for years, even decades. When the core self, with genuine compassion, finally shows up and says, "I see you. I feel how hard you've worked. Thank you. You can rest now." Something miraculous can happen. The protector, feeling seen and appreciated, often relaxes its grip. It doesn't vanish, it transforms. The relentless driver might become a source of healthy ambition. The angry critic might become a source of wise discernment. But the journey doesn't stop with the protectors. Once the protectors trust the self enough to stand down, we can gently approach the exiled parts they were protecting, the vulnerable children, the parts holding the original grief and terror. This requires immense gentleness. You don't rush into that room and turn on the bright lights. You knock softly. You sit with them in their pain. The self, with its boundless compassion, can witness that young pain without being overwhelmed by it. It can hold the memory, the feeling, and offer what the child never received: understanding, comfort, and love. For Michael, this meant, after building a relationship with his driver part, eventually making contact with that hopeless hiding child. He discovered that this part felt fundamentally unlovable, a belief formed in early childhood. His driver part had been trying to prove he was lovable through achievement, when Michael, from his self, could simply sit with that young part and tell it, "I am so sorry you felt so alone. You are not alone anymore. I am here with you, and you are inherently worthy of love just as you are." He began to feel an integration he had never known. The cycle began to dissolve. The driver could relax because the worthlessness was being healed at its source. This is what putting the pieces together truly means. It is not about creating a perfect, conflict-free internal world. That is an illusion. It is about becoming the compassionate leader of your inner world. It's about building a functioning internal committee where every part has a voice, but where the core self holds the gavel. The angry part can share its concerns without taking over the meeting. The fearful part can express its worries without triggering a panic. The playful part can remind everyone to take a break. They are all welcomed, they are all heard, they are all led. This is a daily practice, a moment-to-moment returning to self. It's about noticing when a part gets triggered and, instead of becoming that part, taking a breath and asking, "What are you trying to protect? What do you need me to know?" This is how we reassemble the fragments of our being into a coherent, resilient whole. We are not erasing our history, we are transforming our relationship to it. We are gathering all the lost children of our past and bringing them home under the compassionate leadership of who we truly are. The journey from a house divided to a home whole. When we learn to inhabit our bodies, and when we begin the delicate work of self-leadership, we do a tremendous thing. We start to clean up the internal world. We bring light to the dark rooms. We listen to the voices that have been unheard for so long. It's like finally tending to a house that has been neglected for years. But there's a question that naturally comes next. Once the house is clean and the family is getting along, how do you live in it? How do you go about your days? For many who have known trauma, the internal chaos may have lessened, but the external world can still feel overwhelming, confusing, and without a map. This is where we build the scaffolding for a new life. This is about filling in the holes that trauma left behind, not with old, crumbling materials, but with strong, intentional structures. I want you to picture a vast, open field after a storm. The ground is soft, muddy, unpredictable. There are no paths. Every step is an effort, and you have no sense of direction. This is what life can feel like when the internal structures of a predictable, safe childhood were never built or were washed away by trauma. There's no clear path forward because the very concept of a path is missing. The goal here is not just to feel better internally, but to become the architect of your own life, to lay down the flagstones that create a walkway through that field, so that moving through your days becomes less of a struggle and more of a purposeful journey. This brings us to the first core insight. Structure is not the enemy of freedom, it is its foundation. We often think of structure as restrictive, like a cage. Rules, routines, schedules, they can feel like that. But for a nervous system that has known primarily chaos and threat, a lack of structure is the cage. It's a cage of endless uncertainty, where every decision is fraught with anxiety, and every moment demands you invent a new way to be. A compassionate, self-chosen structure is what creates the container within which safety and therefore freedom can grow. It's the riverbanks that allow the water to flow powerfully forward, rather than spilling out into a stagnant, directionless swamp. Let me tell you about Anna. Anna had done incredible work. She had connected with her body through yoga and mindfulness. She had met her inner critic and her frightened child with immense compassion. She knew in her core that she was safe and worthy. But her daily life was still a source of immense stress. She would wake up with a vague sense of dread about the day ahead. Simple tasks like deciding what to make for dinner or responding to a non-urgent email would paralyze her. She'd spend hours scrolling on her phone, feeling time slip away, which only amplified her shame. She said to me, "I know I'm a good person, I know I'm capable, but my life feels like a boat with no rudder. I just drift from one wave of anxiety to the next." Anna didn't have a hole in her self-worth. She had a hole in her executive functioning. Trauma had disrupted her brain's natural ability to plan, sequence, and initiate, so we didn't talk about her feelings. We talked about her calendar. This was the practical, tangible work of filling in the holes. We started with the most basic structure of all, the morning. Her current structure was wake up, feel overwhelmed, check phone, feel worse, rush. We co-created a new one. It wasn't ambitious. It was simple, almost boring. Wake up, drink a glass of water by the window for 1 minute, make the bed, take a shower, eat the same simple breakfast. That was it. The first week, this felt artificial to her. Her mind rebelled, saying, "This is pointless, this isn't healing." But she persisted, not as a rigid taskmaster, but as a gentle leader, building a new pathway for her nervous system. And that's the second key insight. Rhythm creates regulation. It's not about the content of the routine. It's about the predictable, repetitive rhythm itself. Every time Anna completed that simple morning sequence, she was sending a powerful, non-verbal message to her deep brain. See? The world is predictable. You can know what comes next. I am in charge of the sequence of events. This rhythmic, predictable structure began to act as an external nervous system, a scaffold that held her up, while her internal one grew stronger. The dread began to lessen, not because she had convinced herself not to feel it, but because the physiological experience of predictability was actively calming her alarm system. This work then expanded. We looked at the holes in her week. Sundays were a particular black hole of anxiety about the upcoming week. So, we instituted a Sunday evening structure, 30 minutes to look at the calendar, to plan meals for 3 days, to lay out her clothes. This wasn't about micromanaging her life, it was about reducing the number of decisions she had to make from a place of activation. Every decision we pre-made was one less trigger for her nervous system during the week. She was filling the hole of "what do I do next?" with a pre-built answer. And in doing so, she was reclaiming her cognitive resources for the things that truly mattered to her, for creativity, for connection, for joy. This leads to the third, and perhaps most empowering realization. Building structure is an act of self-care that builds agency. Every time you create and follow a small, self-directed plan, you are proving to yourself that you are competent, you are effective, you can make a plan and see it through. For someone like Anna, who had a deep-seated belief that she was fundamentally incapable of managing her own life, this was medicine. The victory wasn't in completing a huge project. It was in following her own plan to take a walk at 3 p.m. In that small act, she was both the leader who made the plan and the follower who trusted it. She was integrating the manager and the follower parts of herself under the guidance of herself. The structures we build are as unique as we are. For one person, it might be a financial structure, a simple budget that fills the hole of financial terror. For another, it might be a social structure, a standing coffee with a friend every Tuesday that fills the hole of isolation. For another, it might be a physical structure, a tidy room that provides a visual message of order and calm. The form doesn't matter. The intention does. The intention is to become the benevolent architect of your own existence, to look at the landscape of your life, see where the holes are, and patiently, kindly, fill them with solid ground. Anna's journey didn't end with a perfect schedule. It ended with her feeling like the author of her time. The drifting boat grew a rudder and then a motor. She still has days that feel messy because she is human. But now she has a toolkit. She knows that when she feels unmoored, she can return to her structures. She can rebuild the scaffold. The holes don't scare her anymore, because she knows she has the capacity to fill them. This is the final piece of the puzzle. Healing isn't about arriving at a perfect, pain-free life. It's about building a life that is resilient, structured, and compassionate enough to hold all of you through all the seasons. It's about moving from a life that happens to you to a life that you build, one solid, intentional piece at a time. In our work together, we've spoken about coming home to the body, about uniting the inner family under a compassionate leader, and about building a life with sturdy, reliable structures. These are all profound ways of engaging with the mind and the body in the language of experience and feeling. But what about the very organ that translates all of this? The intricate 3-pound universe inside our skulls that records every experience, every shock, every moment of fear and safety. The brain itself carries the scars of what we've lived through. And for so long, many people have felt that the brain's patterns, its deep, etched-in grooves of reaction, were simply their fate, a life sentence. But what if you could speak to the brain in its own native language? What if you could sit down with this most fundamental part of yourself and have a conversation, not with words, but with the very energy that it uses to think and to feel? This is the frontier we explore now, a journey into the heart of the system itself, to explore how we can help the brain rediscover its own natural, resilient rhythm. I want you to imagine your brain as a magnificent, complex orchestra. In a well-balanced orchestra, every section, the strings, the woodwinds, the brass, the percussion, plays its part in harmony. They listen to each other. They create something beautiful and cohesive together. Now, imagine what happens if a traumatic experience strikes. It's as if a sudden, explosive sound frightens the entire orchestra. The violins, representing your fear response, might get stuck playing a single high-pitched note of alarm. The drums, your anger or readiness to fight, might keep pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm long after the danger has passed. The gentle flutes of your calm and focus can't be heard over the noise. The orchestra is no longer making music, it's creating a cacophony. And you, the conductor, are standing there, unable to get them to settle down because the players are too terrified to listen. This is the brain in the aftermath of trauma. It's not that the instruments are broken, it's that they've lost their ability to play in sync. This is the first crucial insight. The patterns of a traumatized brain are not character flaws or personal failures. They are learned, deeply ingrained survival strategies that have become maladaptive. The brain has quite literally wired itself for danger. The neural pathways that shout, "Alert! Threat!" are wide, well-paved superhighways, while the quiet country roads that lead to calm and connection are overgrown and difficult to find. Talking therapy can be like giving the conductor a better manual, a better understanding of why the orchestra is so upset. Somatic work can be like helping the conductor feel the rhythm in their own body. But what if we could give the orchestra players themselves a direct, immediate experience of what harmony actually feels like? This is where the concept of neurofeedback comes in. Now, I need to be very clear here. This is not a technique you can do at home by yourself. It's a guided process, a form of training, but understanding its principle is incredibly empowering. Think of it as a kind of mirror for the brain. Our brains are constantly producing electrical patterns, brain waves, which are the music of the orchestra. These waves shift and change with our states of mind, fast and busy when we're anxious, slow and rhythmic when we're calm and focused. Neurofeedback provides a way for the brain to see and hear its own activity in real time. It's like setting up a video screen for the orchestra players so they can see for the first time exactly what sound they are making. This isn't about thinking or trying, it's about allowing the brain to witness itself. Let me share a story about a man I'll call David. David was a veteran who had tried everything. He could talk for hours about his experiences. He had found a measure of peace through meditation, but his startled response was still off the charts. A car backfiring would send him into a tailspin for hours. He was exhausted from being constantly on guard. His internal orchestra, specifically the section responsible for vigilance, was playing a fortissimo of alarm around the clock. He began a course of neurofeedback, which for him involved sitting comfortably, watching a movie on a screen. The catch was that the movie and the sound were actually controlled by the activity of his own brain. When his brain produced calmer, more organized wave patterns, the movie would play clearly and the volume would be strong. When his brain waves became chaotic or overly agitated, the movie would dim and the sound would fade. That was the signal. That was the mirror. Now, here is the second and most fascinating key to this process. There is no instruction manual. David wasn't told, "Okay, now try to make the movie brighter." In fact, trying hard, using his conscious thinking mind, usually made it worse. The learning happens on a level far deeper than conscious thought. It's a biological learning. It's like learning to ride a bike. You don't learn by memorizing the laws of physics. You learn by wobbling and feeling your way into balance. His brain, presented with this gentle, instantaneous feedback, began to explore. It would stumble into a state of slightly more coherence and be rewarded with a clear picture. It would slip into agitation and the feedback would gently diminish. Over session after session, his brain, on its own, began to discover the path of least resistance toward a more regulated state. It was learning, all by itself, how to turn down the volume on the violins of fear and allow the other instruments to be heard. This leads us to the third profound realization. The brain possesses an innate, powerful capacity for self-regulation and healing. We are not imposing something foreign onto the brain. We are not fixing a broken machine. We are simply creating the conditions for the brain to remember its own natural, healthy balance. It's like providing a trampled field with good soil, sunlight and water, and then stepping back to watch the native wildflowers return on their own. The potential for coherence was always there, buried under the noise of survival. Neurofeedback is one way to help clear that noise. For David, the changes were subtle at first, then profound. After several sessions, he noticed he could drive on the highway without his hands clenched on the wheel. Then, one day, a truck did backfire nearby. His heart jumped, of course. That's a normal human response. But for the first time in decades, the alarm didn't cascade. It didn't take over his entire system. It sounded, and then it faded. The orchestra had learned, through direct experience, that it didn't need to sustain the note. It could return to the broader piece of music. He described it as a quieting of the internal storm. He hadn't fought the storm. He had taught his nervous system how to find the calm eye at its center. This work is not a magic bullet. It is a partnership. It works hand in hand with the other forms of healing we've discussed. When your brain begins to find a new rhythm, the work of self-leadership becomes easier. When your body is not constantly flooded with alarm signals, it becomes a safer place to inhabit. It's another powerful tool for rewriting the old score, not just in the mind, not just in the body, but in the very source of the mind and body, the living, breathing, electrical universe of your brain. It is a profound testament to our capacity for change, a reminder that even our most deep-seated patterns are not carved in stone. They are etched in living pathways, and where there is life, there is always the potential for a new path to be found. We've journeyed deep into the internal landscapes of the self, the body, the brain, the internal family. We've spoken about the solitude of trauma, the way it can make you feel like an island, utterly separate from the mainland of humanity. But what if the final, and perhaps most profound, step of healing isn't something we do alone in a quiet room, but something we find in the presence of others? What if the key to unlocking a part of ourselves isn't through deeper introspection, but through shared rhythm, through collective story, through finding our voice not just for ourselves, but to be heard by a witnessing, compassionate community? This is where we explore the healing power of coming together, of discovering that we are not just a solitary note, but part of a magnificent, interconnected symphony. I want you to think about a time you were at a concert, or even just listening to music with friends, and you found yourself tapping your foot. Without any thought, your body synced up with the beat. Or remember a time you were in a room full of people laughing, and you found yourself laughing too, even before you knew the joke. This isn't just social conformity, this is a biological reality. Our nervous systems are designed to entrain with one another, to sync up, to find a common rhythm. It's how mothers calm their babies, how communities bond, how we feel a part of something larger than ourselves. Trauma shatters this connection. It throws your internal metronome completely off beat so that you can no longer find the rhythm of the people around you. You feel out of sync, a discordant instrument in an orchestra you can no longer hear. This is the first fundamental insight. Healing requires not only a reconnection with the self, but a reconnection with the tribe. For so long, the message of your body has been, you are alone, you must protect yourself, no one can understand. And so, you retreat. But in that retreat, the very system that needs co-regulation, the soothing that comes from a calm, connected other, is starved. We are biologically wired to heal in community. The safety of a group, the shared breath, the synchronized movement, these are not just nice ideas. They are powerful neurological medicine that can reach places words alone cannot touch. Let me tell you about a woman named Clara. Clara had a history that made it very difficult for her to trust groups. She always felt on the outside looking in. She described it as feeling like there was an invisible pane of glass between her and other people. She could see them connecting, laughing, being easy with one another, but she couldn't access it. She felt clumsy, awkward, and deeply ashamed of her own inability to just join in. Talk therapy helped her understand why she felt this way, but it didn't dissolve the pane of glass. Then, somewhat reluctantly, she joined a community drumming circle. Not a performance group, but a therapeutic one, where the goal wasn't to be good, but to be present. The first session was agony for her. She held her drums stiffly, her taps were barely audible. She was so focused on not making a mistake, on what everyone else thought of her, that she was completely disconnected from the sound, from the rhythm, from the people around her. She was trapped in her head, but the facilitator wasn't interested in perfection. He started a simple, steady, undeniable beat. Boom, boom, boom. And he invited everyone to just listen, and then when they felt it, to join in. At first, Clara's soft, irregular taps were like a faint, distant echo. But the core rhythm held by the group was so strong, so steady, that slowly, almost imperceptibly, her own tapping began to find it. Her nervous system, entrained to the collective pulse, began to align. She wasn't thinking her way into it. Her body was following the sound home. This is the second key. Communal rhythm allows for a non-verbal conversation. There is no right or wrong story to tell with a drum. There is only, "Do you hear me? I hear you. Can we find this beat together?" In that circle, Clara didn't have to explain her past. She didn't have to find the right words. She only had to let her hands fall in time with others, and in doing so, she was communicating the most fundamental message of safety. I am with you, you are with me, we are in sync. The pane of glass began to fog up, not from the heat of her anxiety, but from the warmth of a shared primal experience. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking. She was just being in a river of shared sound. But rhythm is only one part of the story. What about our voice? Trauma so often steals our voice. It tells us our story is too shameful to tell, that our truth is too much for others to bear, that we must hold it all inside. This is where the power of theatre, of drama, comes in. Not Broadway theatre, but therapeutic theatre. The kind of space where you are invited to play, to pretend, to try on a different way of being without any risk at all. After several months in the drumming circle, Clara felt brave enough to join a playback theatre group. In this form, someone from the audience, someone like Clara, would share a small story from their life, a moment of joy, a moment of frustration, a childhood memory. Then, the actors would immediately get up and enact it, reflecting the story back to them without judgment, with empathy, and often a touch of poetry. At first, Clara only watched. She saw her own feelings and experiences mirrored in the stories of others, and that alone was a revelation. She was not alone in her struggles. Then one day she shared a very small story. A simple memory of building a fort with her brother when she was 7, a rare, bright moment of safety and play in a difficult childhood. She told the story haltingly, and then the actors brought it to life. They became the children, they became the blankets and chairs, they captured the giggles, the whispers, the sacredness of that small, hidden world. They didn't just act out the events, they embodied the feeling. And Clara, watching this, began to cry. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition. She said, "I always knew that memory was happy, but I didn't know it was that beautiful. I didn't know my own story could be so valuable. This is the third and most transformative insight. When we witness our story being held and honored by others, it changes our relationship to the story itself. It's no longer a secret, shameful burden we carry alone in the dark. It becomes a narrative, a piece of art, something that can be shared and can connect us. And then the next step is even more powerful, stepping into the play itself. Clara eventually began to take roles in other people's stories. She would play the wise grandmother, the brave explorer, the loyal friend. In pretending to be these characters, she was not being fake. She was exercising neural pathways of strength, of wisdom, of compassion that were her own, but had long been dormant. She was trying on her own potential. Finding your voice isn't just about speaking your truth. It's about discovering that your truth, when spoken into a receptive space, can create an echo of understanding. It's about discovering that your body, when moving in rhythm with others, can remember its place in the human tribe. The isolation of trauma is a lie. It tells you that you are broken beyond repair, set apart forever. But the experience of communal rhythm and collective story whispers a deeper truth, that we are wired for one another, that our healing is found in the circle, in the rhythm, in the shared act of telling and listening. It is in the drumbeat that finds our pulse, and in the play that helps us remember all the other people we have always had the capacity to be. The journey ends where it was always meant to, not in solitude, but in communion. So, after all of this, after exploring the maps of the body, the mind, and the community, where does that leave us? It leaves us with perhaps the most simple and the most profound realization of all. Healing is not a destination you arrive at one day, a finish line you cross after a long and grueling race. It is not a state of being where the past is erased and the pain is completely gone. If you've been waiting for that, you can let that burden go right now. Healing is, instead, a quality of the path itself. It is the conscious daily choice to turn toward yourself with curiosity instead of criticism. It is the choice to listen to the tightness in your chest as a message, not a life sentence. It is the choice to breathe into a moment of panic, to move your body when it feels frozen, to reach out for connection when every fiber of your being screams to isolate. It is the choice to be the compassionate leader of your own inner world, to build structures for a life of meaning, and to find your unique voice within the chorus of humanity. The great lesson woven through every page of this work, the one I hope you carry with you, is this: you are not passive in your story. You are not a museum curator for your pain, simply dusting off the same old exhibits day after day. You're an active, living, breathing participant in your own becoming. The choices you make today, the choice to notice, to befriend, to structure, to connect, these are the tools with which you sculpt a future that is not held hostage by the past. Your journey is unique. It will have its own rhythm, its own setbacks, and its own beautiful, unexpected breakthroughs. Do not measure it against anyone else's. The goal is not to become a different person, but to return home to the person you have always been, beneath the weight of what you were forced to carry. To inhabit your life fully, with all its scars and all its strength. If this conversation has touched something in you, if it has made you feel even a little less alone on this path, then I invite you to stay with us for more deep talks like this. This is just the beginning of the conversation. Wherever you are in your journey, remember this: the most important step is not a step backward into the past, and not a frantic leap into a perfect future. It is the gentle, courageous step you take inward in this very moment, and that is a choice that is always, always yours to make.